Recording's on.
You are a citizen.
Welcome to day 2, gentlemen, and no lady. Anyway, the diehards are here for the first session of day 2. My talk this morning is about a chap called C.A. Cumming. Some years ago, I began to take an interest in the maker's name that often appears on the reverse of Australian enamel badges. Apart from the most well-known firms such as Stokes, Amor, Wallace Bishop, Schlank, Sheridan, etc., there did not seem to be much written or known about them. In collecting examples of Australian badges with what I call a maker's name on the reverse, I came across Cumming on a badge that was for the Mackay Regatta Club. The late Hugh Armstrong was kind enough to look in his library to see if he had any information on the business, and in a 1923 Pew's Almanac he found an entry for a watchmaker and jeweller in Mackay under Cumming. This was a start and much appreciated, but without further impetus I left the quest in abeyance. In December 2018, a friend visiting Canberra alerted me to some items he had seen for sale at an antique shop that he thought I might be interested in, and sent me a couple of snaps of them. I emailed the shop seeking more details, but got no reply. That all changed 5 years and 2 months later, when I got an email reply when I got an email reply with details of a couple of the items. The delay had been due to the shop owner passing away. Next picture, please. Next image. The one was an 18-carat handcrafted fob, which you see illustrated there, presented by the people of Mackay to Lieutenant C.A. Cumming on his return from the Boer War in 1900. Just have a look on the back. The next one, thank you. So there's the back, 1900, presented to Lieutenant C.A. Cumming by the people of Mackay. Now it depends on whether you say Mackay or Mackay. Even the locals don't know, in my opinion. They're pretty equally divided. Accompanying it was a small card jeweller's box issued by the firm C.A. Cumming. Next. So it's a small box, shows its address as 100 Victoria Street, Mackay, which is one of the main streets. The question was raised, am I interested? You bet I was. From the email photos I received, next photo please. That's a bit not what I was hoping to see. Even I can't make out what that is. Oh, at the top there is FR. FR with a dot in between. I don't know whether you can see that or not. Oh, yeah. The maker of the fob looked like FR or FB, as the piece was voided near the punch. So I felt that it may have been FR&S, Lavelle Robertson Sankey, well-known jewellery firm of Brisbane and Mackay. However, the style was completely unlike their very professional and often enamelled pieces. Of course, when the piece later came to hand, the punch was clearly FR, and there was no place for any missing S. So, who was FR? What more could I find out about C.A. Cumming? That's a bit hard to look at, so we might go on to the next one. No, just go back if you wouldn't mind too. Thanks very much. Looking at the Trove, in 1923, as I knew Hugh Armstrong's information showed the business was in operation then, I immediately found a reference to C.A. Cumming's death after a long illness in December, just by sheer coincidence. He left a widow, a daughter and 6 sons. This was a surprise, as it looked as though my story was over before it began. How wrong I was. His obituary in the Daily Mercury said that he had been born in Maryborough in 1872, that's Maryborough, Queensland, and came to Mackay with his parents at the age of 4. From Queensland's birth deaths marriages, I found out his name was Charles Alexander Cumming. So we're getting little bits and pieces of information here. The newspaper report said that young Alex entered the service of his uncle, the late G.H. Reichman, and years later, upon the death of the latter, he purchased the business. That was interesting. But the initials on the fob should be GR, because the newspaper report said G.H. Reichman. From the newspaper, not FR as on the fob. The obituary mentioned C.A. Cumming had served in the Boer War, being in the Battle of Sunnyside, but when he volunteered for World War I, he was declined due to his poor health. He was reported to be active in the Rifle Club, Show Society, Masonic and Foresters Affairs. Foresters are a lodge like Oddfellows or something like that. From a report in the Daily Mercury in 1917, there was an advertisement stating that C.A. Cumming had taken over, and this is a quotation, the old and established jewellery business of the late F. Reichelman. So G.H. Reichelman, as reported in his obituary, is not correct. The advertisement in 1917 says his uncle, as it turns out, F. Reichelman. So on 28th of November 1917, it said in the advertisement, later Reichelman, sorry about that. The spelling of Reichelman in all these reports is either R-E-I-C-H-E-L-M-A-N-N or R-I-E-C-H-M-A-N-N. It's just confusion. I'll go on. The gold fob, it turns out, had been made by his uncle, who was a jeweller, or in his shop. From the Queensland birth, deaths and marriages data, I found that Frederick Nicolaus Carl Reichelman married Edith Agnes Cumming on the 19th of October 1885. His death entry, with a different spelling of Reichelman, so even the birth, deaths and marriages has got 2 different spellings of it, shows he died on the 31st of August 1915. In his obituary, the same Mackay newspaper, who spelled his name differently in 2 different paragraphs, stated that Reichelman had been in Mackay for 45 years, where he was initially apprenticed to a watchmaker named Weiser, W-I-S-S-E-R. So there's some pretty strong German spellings coming through here. Now, it turns out that his uncle, Cumming's uncle, Reichelman, was like himself in the mounted infantry, and he had retired as a major in August 1901. It's interesting that in an 1891 report, he was one of the mounted infantry sent out to Western Queensland in 1893 to restore law and order during the Shearers' strike, one of the most significant events in Australian Union history. Now, we've found out that C.A. Cumming is the nephew of our friend Friedrich Reichelman. Reichelman's died in 1915, and in 1917 he's taken over the business formally in advertising that he's the new owner and operator. Subsequently to this, a further piece, Stephen, you can go to that one, lovely. He's anticipating my move that by almost telepathy. It's wonderful. Then a further piece related to C.A. Cumming turned up from the same source. It was a Masonic jewel from Temple Lodge number 12. Interestingly with the initials QC, Queensland Constitution. Awarded for his service as Master of the Lodge and dated 30th of May 1917. Stephen. So here's the back of it, and again, Stephen, He's the presented to Worshipful Brother, C.A. Cumming, PM, Past Master. Next one. Unfortunately that marks upside down, but it reads 18 CT, and there's the date in 1917. One more. Here's some more marks, again with the mark FR. Now, there was only one problem. Having found this piece dated 1917, all nicely named to him, the question arises, hang on, Friedrich Reichelmann's dead. He died in 1915. So it was clear from the pieces here that you don't throw out the good steel punches that you've had specially made up just because your uncle's died. You use what's to hand, because that cuts costs. So clearly the change in the ownership of the jeweller's business had not led to new punches being made, and the new owner had just continued to use the old ones. Now, is it the possibility that C.A. Cumming made his own Masonic jewel? Well, if it wasn't him, it might have been a similar employed jeweller in the firm who continued to use what was to hand, the punches for 15 carat or 18 carat, and the FR mark. So, if not by himself, then certainly by someone in the same firm. Another aspect of this, if you take it back just two, please, or three, another one, and again, thank you. Another one, a question that arises, is this use of the term QC on the Masonic jewel. As we discussed yesterday, almost all lodges in Queensland are English, Scottish or Irish constitution, and the Queensland Constitution was an interim step before the forming of the Grand Lodge of Queensland in 1921. But you'll be glad to hear that there is another paper on that, not this one. Perhaps enough Masonic material already. So in June 1904, C.A. Cumming, known as Alex, married Mabel State, S-T-A-Y-T-E, who came from a long-established Mackay family. Cumming was described as a lieutenant in the local squadron of the 15th Australian Light Horse. So what happened after his death, the death of C.A. Cumming in 1923? As might be expected, the business continued under his widow, charge of his widow, and at least from 1924, with the assistance of her sister, who was described as the manageress, Olive State. Certainly by 1937, there are newspaper reports of his son, so that's 14 years after his death, being involved with the business. He is mentioned as presenting C.A. Cumming badges to the Premier, Junior and Cricket team. Now we know that in the newspaper terminologies, a badge can mean almost anything. It can mean a trophy, it can mean a fob, it can mean a brooch, it can mean an enamel badge, it can mean all sorts of things. So what the cricket team actually got, I don't know. So if we go on a few more from that, we'll see a couple of enamel badges. Oh, this is just the linkage with the stamp on that. In fact, another one please. Every part of that lodge jewel, every piece of it, is separately marked with the carat fineness and the maker's punch mark. And I think there's about 5 different places it's separately marked. So there's not much doubt as to what its fineness was, or any doubt as to who the maker was. So here's some more pieces from Mackay which get back to the question, was he an enamel badge maker? Like most jewellers, there are many mentions in the local newspapers of C.A. Cumming presenting cups, trophies, medals, fobs, as well as badges to a large number of sports in Mackay and the Pioneer district. Pioneer is the river in Mackay. Certainly there is evidence of enamel badges being made with the name Cumming on the reverse, for sports in Mackay. The city of Mackay is 330 kilometres north of Rockhampton, or 970 north from Brisbane, and 380 kilometres south from Townsville. So its location must have given a local badge maker some competitive advantage over these distant suppliers. However, the population of Mackay from around and the surrounding Pioneer Shire was only 20,600 people in 1933, and by 1954 had only grown to 29,000. So there's not much of a consumer base to draw from. So he probably had a stranglehold on most of these organisations. Like many jewellers and watchmakers, I can only suggest that badge making was a sideline, like selling wirelesses in some jeweller shops or doing hearing tests, and certainly acting as opticians. So we'll just take a moment to have a look at a couple of the badges that I've found over the years. Just go back to that first one, sorry. There's no maker's mark on this, but it is from Mackay. It is enamel quality, reasonably simple, just two colours, but marked sterling silver, which I think this is the only piece I've seen that's marked sterling silver that I think may have been from Cumming. But no other maker's name is present, not Wallace Bishop or Hanford or Parks. Next, please. Here's the sort of sports badges that I think would have been his bread and butter, probably 1950s by the form of the attachment. The name's quite clearly given, but again, reasonably simple. Three colours, a dark colour, green, light green, and the orange for the ball. Next one, please. This one's a little bit more elaborate, although quite small in size. Again, the name on the back, and probably for a ladies' hockey, as it says here. What's that? Mackay Roller Hockey Association. So here's the roller skates, the hockey, and that's presumably the net where they scored the goals in. That's got a little bit more complication to it, particularly given the coat of arms and the small scale of it, but good quality glass enamel. Next one, please. Here's one for basketball, probably much later, probably 60s. Very simple, two colours. Not much you can say about that. Next one, please. And here we are. A very surprising style of this fob type arrangement, which would have, at one stage, I feel, had a loop on the top of that, but awarded in 1965. The style of that is completely out of character, and I would imagine that they've been making this badge for this organisation for many, many years, or that punch has been adapted. Instead of saying Mackay Softball Association, might have said Mackay Cricket or Football, one of these more generic type things, and they've adopted it. But again, reasonably simple, only two colours of enamel, but no maker's name. So if it was Bishop or was Parks, almost certainly there would have been a name on the back. Next one. And that's the end. This is the one we started with. That's where it starts and finishes.
There's one more picture.
Oh, is it? Okay, let's have a look at it then. It's obviously a special. Oh, yes.
There's still a couple more, I think.
Oh, is it? Okay. This is an interesting scene of a Mackay Harbour. It's not in silver, probably in something like Cooper nickel or I don't know what. But it's got a scene of an enclosed harbour there. Mackay is famous for its harbour now, much larger than this. This cost nearly £1 million in 1937 to have built. Can you imagine what £1 million would buy now? But you can see the anchors either side. Quite a complex design, but it's again small, no maker's name coming. But I believe that this was produced, although I can't prove it, for the opening of the harbour, which was eventually opened in 1941. It began about 37, 38. What next have you got for me, Stephen?
That's the last one.
That's the last one. So that just gives you an oversight of the two pieces that led me on this journey, and I'd have to say that this is as close as I've come to having any detailed information on any badge maker that's not a large firm with lots and lots of records around the place. Newspaper reports of this chap who unfortunately died early in life. Business continued, I think, by his wife, certainly up until the 50s, I feel, probably into the 60s, and doing a whole range of general jewellery, and badge making was a sideline. Thank you. I don't know if I can answer
Any questions for Bernie?
John's got one there for me. Your nearest question of maybe behind you.
Yes. You mentioned about Rickelman.
Yep.
Rickelman was a very well-known family in Mackay.
Okay.
And in fact, Dr. Rickelman, as he was called, was the first doctor of dentistry in Queensland. He obtained a doctorate from the United States. Probably, I suspect, the son or the father of the Rickelman that you described.
Could be, yes. That'd be quite early then. It'd be taking it back into sort of the 1870s, that.
No, in the early 1900s.
Oh, right. So Rickelman died in 1940. He may be a brother.
Probably.
Could be a brother.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting that he's a well-known name.
My father was a dental apprentice in Mackay in 1922 to Dr. Rickelman.
So from your expertise, John, do you say Mackay or Mackay?
Mackay.
Okay.
My grandma always said Mackay. My grandfather always said Mackay.
A perfect solution. Everyone's happy.
Bernie, you've shown these wonderful badges of the different sporting clubs. Mackay is incredible. On a Saturday morning, the entire township is out there playing sport. It's quite, I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's dramatic to be in Mackay on a Saturday morning. But every sporting field is packed with families and children and young people all playing. But it's not surprising to seeing the early tradition of that.
Yes.
In all these, the badges and all these softball and basketball and other clubs.
And that would have been a wonderful business for the jeweller, because you can make the badges in anticipation of a new year. One for 1965, they would have wanted 64, different badge, not just a little tag that he could put on there. And of course, the trophies that he was presenting, he would have presented one trophy, but there probably was 8 or 10 that the club had presented that year for the various types of awards, and he made all the others and made his money out of those as well. John.
That beautiful gold presentation of the soldier,
Yes.
the amount of soldier given to company.
Yeah.
You think he
Could
made
you show
that?
that?
Did you think he made that himself, or was it?
No, I think.
Presented. You think it was commissioned by worthy citizens?
Yes.
To say thank you to him.
Yes.
But would there have been somebody else to actually craft it?
Well, it's got the stamp here, FR, for it's come out of that jeweller's shop.
I see.
So whether Rickelman produced it with his own hands, or you had an employed jeweller, or a jeweller cut it out and then a separate person engraved it, these things are questions we can't answer at this stage. And that's why the Masonic piece from the Hallstone jewel yesterday was so remarkable, in that we know who designed it, who made it, how the carat was arrived at, and also who engraved it. A fantastic detail. But unfortunately this is lost in the mists of time as to who actually did it. But if we didn't have that FR on it, we wouldn't know the workshop or whatever. And very unusual to see these marks on the front. Those marks are usually contained on the back. So there's a story for that too, or a reason for that. Yes, Steve.
How late or how modern do the coming badges go? Do you know?
Well, that one that I've showed there is dated 1965. Now, once you're getting past 1965, transportation is a lot easier, communication is a lot easier. He would have been fending off orders from the likes of AJ Parks and Wallace Bishop and their competitors in Rockhampton. So I don't know of a dated badge later than that 1965 one. But I have no. I mean, that's my whole accumulation of coming badges, and it's only less than a handful, and a couple of them are not marked to coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, our next speaker is David Mee. From the medieval to the modern world, 20 years either side of 1500. David.
Thank you, Ron. Probably be speaking at this side of the rostrum rather than behind it, because I need to see what's coming up. But this, what I've presented here is just a set of images. Okay, there's no text or any verbal information to accompany it. It will come from my mouth. But what I'm trying to do here is tell you why I think the years from 1420 to 1480 to 1520, 40 years around the year 1500, are very important to the whole development of Western civilization. And it's really a numismatic tour, starting from the medieval era, which I think we can agree this coin represents pretty typically a medieval groat. And I'm going to start with British coins before I move on to European coins, because most of us have got a better idea of the British hierarchy of royalty and so on, and what was happening there, and then trying to relate that to what was happening elsewhere in the Western world. But why do I say that's medieval? Well, the first thing is, when you look, especially on the right side there, you look at the lettering. You see the M's are all curved, the E is closed. It's essentially Gothic. Gothic lettering is how the numismatic fraternity refers to it. And you can also see the inner legend there, Civitas London, for no prizes for guessing where that was made. And that is a coin of roughly, probably maybe a little bit before 1480, of Edward IV. It's a first-rate coin, I admit, but it's in Edward IV in 1480 was during his second reign after the brief restoration of Henry VI, and he didn't live very long past that. 1482 was as far as he got. So I thought I'd illustrate the beginning of this in Britain, and just a London groat of Edward. And the portrait, as we call it a portrait, but it's not really, it's a cartoon, a little caricature of what a king might or should look like, and nevertheless, interesting. Okay, next. Okay, Edward, in this his second reign, minted the Angel, quite a nice gold coin, and as you can tell, the early Edward ones of this period, the end of the Wars of the Roses, because the Angel is always in feathers, whereas a little bit later and the new Angels were, medieval sort of breastplates and a different style altogether. But the feathers of the Angel spearing the dragon given away, and then the little ship, even then the naval power of Britain, England, such as it was represented by the ship in the waves. Next. Okay, here we come to a groat of his brother, Richard III. Now, Judy alluded to this in her talk yesterday about the wicked uncle, and certainly Shakespeare presents him as this. Richard III was the brother of Edward. Edward was married to a woman called Elizabeth Woodville, and they had three children. Daughter, the elder one, Elizabeth, and then they had two younger ones, Edward and Richard, and Edward became actually King Edward V, very briefly, not crowned, but he was known as that, and unfortunately, the two young boys were put in the Tower of London by their uncle, supposedly protecting them, and that was the last anybody ever saw of them. And that was Richard. So he got a bad reputation, and Shakespeare gave him such. If you read Richard III there, famous quote, "This is our winter of discontent." And anyway, he didn't last too long, because Henry Tudor had a big following too, Welshman, and eventually the big battle of the Bosworth Field. This guy was stranded there, horseless. A horse, my kingdom for a horse. You all know the quotes. And anyway, he was slain on the battlefield and buried, who knows where, until someone, not that many years ago, found him buried in a hospital car park in Leicester. I thought it was an amazing story, but nevertheless, Richard III. So a lot of people consider that in Britain anyway, this was the end of the Middle Ages, the Battle of Bosworth, because the last English king to be killed on the battlefield was him. However, he's not the last British king to be killed on the battlefield, as we'll see. But anyway, next one. Anyway, Henry Tudor came up. This is not my coin, I'd like it to be. I don't own this one, but here we are, the lovely gold sovereign, Tudor sovereign that the Henry Tudor minted. These things go for about £500,000 these days. Ridiculously expensive, but they're beautiful coins. You've got to next. This one is mine, and this is a groat. It's still a medieval look, okay, so you can say this is a medieval coin. Nothing particularly modern or different about it from the last one we looked at, a small closed crown. I think there's only distinction really. And once again, Civitas London, the most common mint of all of these things. Next. Okay, when his son came to the throne, in 1509, Henry Tudor died, Henry VII died. His son Henry VIII still put his father's portrait on the coin, it's the coin of Henry VII. But you see, this is now starting to be a more realistic portrait. So we are definitely moving an art style from that sort of medieval thing to the more modern. But nevertheless, the lettering is still in Gothic, and it's a nice and interesting coin, that one. Next. And then Henry finally, the young King Henry VIII, finally put his portrait. So this is, once again, still in Gothic, so nothing particularly different about that, but nevertheless a more realistic portrait than previously on coins. Now I should say here, we narrowly missed out on a King Arthur as well in this here, because King, backtrack a bit. Henry, by the way, married the sister of the brothers, younger brothers who were princes of the Tower, Elizabeth of York, and so she was the mother of Henry VIII. Yes, I was going to say Henry VIII had two boys, the elder being Arthur and the younger being Henry. And Arthur died before his... Sorry? Henry VII, sorry. Henry VII. Yes, thanks. Henry VII had two children, and Henry, who became Henry VIII, was the younger. Arthur died before his father did. So we might have had another King Arthur as well, if we didn't. Next. Okay, let's go to Scotland. Here's an alternative date for the end of medieval period in Britain. Here we have in 1480 King James III on the throne, and for the first time we're trying to get a realistic portrait here, a three-quarter facing portrait of the king. Very unusual, the first time in British coins you can say someone's attempting what you might call a Renaissance portrait. A lovely groat, and really that's only a recent acquisition. Here's it in, Steve. I'm pleased to have it. Next one. Okay, in 1488 James III died, and his son, James IV, they're all James in the 15th century, came to the throne as a plaque, not a portrait coin, but next one. And also, the next one's a little penny of James. These are the only two coins of James I have, but he minted nicer coins than these. He is also famous for being the last British king to die in battle, on the battlefield at the Battle of Flodden in 1515. So that's also an alternative date, you could say, is an event you might call the end of the medieval period. Because, next one, his son, actually only a baby when he came to the throne in 1515, James V, also a nice coin, but that's a little bit later than when he came to the throne, obviously, he's a grown man then. He's the father of Mary Queen of Scots, just to sort of complete the picture there. But, so I'm just showing those British coins to show the style, and you can see even there on the lettering, we're starting to see less than Gothic. It's more just bold Latin. Things easier to read. Next one. Let's go across the channel to France. That Battle of Flodden, by the way, was fought in England and defeated by Henry's, one of the Earl of Surrey or something, I've forgotten her name now. But it was part of the old alliance between Scotland and France. When France was in trouble with England, the idea was that Scotland would attack England, so that would take the pressure off France, and vice versa, that was supposed to happen. But this coin here is quite a nice coin of Dauphiny, when the future King Louis XI was Dauphin, minted in Dauphiny, and you can tell that because the quartered lilies and the dolphins on the shield there. That's quite an interesting coin and fairly difficult to get. Next one. And then the move over to the regular royal kings of France. We have, after Louis XI died in the late 15th century, we've got Charles VIII come along and famously married Anne of Brittany. Judy talked about Brittany being an independent fief, but in fact it was brought in at this point into the royal domain, and from then on Brittany was part of the royal France. K for Carolus, Charles. Next one. And this shows the marriage of Anne of Brittany. It's a medallion I don't have, but an interesting one showing the King of France and the Anne, Duchess of Brittany, their marriage memorial medallion. Next one. Now, famously, Anne was married twice because Charles died fairly early and Anne was a widow. And the next king also married her. They wanted to keep Britain in their family, so she was Queen of France twice. And this is a coin minted by Louis, the successor of Charles, Louis XII. And you can see it's a sort of combination Breton, French coin because it's got fleur-de-lis on one side, but it's also got those Breton ermine tails on it. Next. This was now Louis was fairly warlike, and he decided he wanted to go and rescue the French kingdom of Naples. And the first place he went to and conquered was Milan. There's a coin of Milan, but under Louis XII of France, St Ambrose on that side, but you can see the fleur-de-lis on the other side, the groat size coin. Next one. In 1515, a distant-ish relationship, like a second cousin or something, Francis came to the throne, and he's considered one of the great French Renaissance kings. This is minted also with the Dauphiny coat of arms, but you'll see there Franciscus Rex as the king. What a nice gold coin. Not terribly rare, but in good condition. A few knocks. Next one. And then finally we're now well into the Renaissance portraits with a realistic portrait of Francis I, a Teston, that's called, and one also nice to have. But I got that in Jim Noble's auction about 10 years ago, I think it was. Next. Okay. Just a little thing, this is a segue from one thing to another, but in the end of the life of Leonardo da Vinci, who painted that painting, he got very pally with Francis of France, and Francis asked him to come and live in France with him in his later years. In fact, Leonardo da Vinci died in France in 1519 or about, so almost, his span was before our period, but ended right at the end of it. and not one of the greatest thinkers and artists of ever in the world. And he went to France. That's why I sort of associated with France. And the model he's credited with helping design the famous chateau of Chambord on the Loire. Next one. Yeah, a lot of that design of that palace, which is one of the most famous Loire chateaux, is credited with Leonardo, and he died in France in Chamboise. So that's sort of links me back up to the artistic things that are going on at this time. Next. Okay, another polymath that really I'm a great fan of. You probably don't guess who it is, but this is the Pole, Nicholas Copernicus. You've heard of Nicholas Copernicus? He was the first one. Before, in the medieval period, okay, everyone woke up, the sun went around the earth, and you know, the earth was nice and flat. That was the belief then. And he was the one who realised, no, we live on a globe, and we rotate around the sun and not the other way around. Surprisingly, in Poland, the clerical people there were much more open to ideas. They welcomed him, they encouraged him. And he was born into a fairly rich family in a town called Torun, which is on the Vistula, the big river that goes through eastern Poland. And he was born into his father was a German merchant, because these were Hanseatic towns. His mother was quite well off, and her brother was the bishop of the local bishop. So he got a good education, and his genius was realised, and he went to the University of Krakow. Next one. That was he's still got Torun. Fortunately, escaped any damage during the World Wars, and this beautiful house was still there in Torun, famous Hanseatic city in what was Prussia then, and that's his birthplace. And here's a coin of Torun. The Polish kings minted coins of a lot of the cities have just got their name on, so with the badge, which is that sort of cross of Lorraine thing there. And the coin is of Casimir IV, Jagiellon is his full name. And he was not only king of, in those days, not only king of Poland, centred with the capital Krakow, but also the Grand Duke of Lithuania. We had in these days the start of the great Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Have you heard of it? Well, I've done a lot of research on that because of the wars in Ukraine, and it's something, if you don't know about, you're interested in Eastern Europe, this was a great institution. Next one. A similar coin of the same king, but not minted in Torun, but minted in Krakow. Not great coins in terms of design, fairly ordinary, but nevertheless, this is money that Copernicus would have had when he was wandering around the place. Also, interestingly, Copernicus was sent to Italy. He spent Rome. At 1500, he spent in Rome, and he went to the University of Bologna to study. Next. Okay, sorry, another Polish coin of Janset this time. Next. Oh, and another Polish coin. This is definitely a modern coin. 1532, sorry. So a little bit later, but this king started in 1506, so this is one that Copernicus would have had in his pocket when he spent. And he was a great king, Sigmund the First, the old. See the Polish emblem here with the eagle holding the sword. Next. Okay, back to Italy. Here we go. Now, Italy in the late 15th century, 16th century was dominated by the popes. And as you know, we have the famous Sistine Chapel being built in Rome, and this is a grove of Sixtus IV, after whom the chapel was named. And you can see that this tree here with the crossing branches, that's the Della Rovere family, which the Pope was a member of. Next, and we've got two saints there. I love this one. This is the next Pope that came along. They came on fairly frequently because they tend to be elected late in life and don't last too long. But I love this one, especially with the St. Peter Fishy, the Fisher of Men, as proclaimed. because the popes obviously were all considered to be the representatives of St. Peter. Next. Okay, here we have the Borgia Pope, who was Pope in the year 1500 when Copernicus went to Rome, and he was a bit of a scoundrel really in many ways, and because of him a lot of the practices that were set up in the Catholic Church the priests subject to, and of course the Reformation started in this period, the whole Protestant Reformation. Luther nailed his thesis on the Wittenberg Cathedral door during these years. Next. This one is also interesting because this is of Pope Julius. Now you look at the papal badge there, the cross tree, the arm with the cross branches. He was also a Della Rovera family member, and he wanted to get the Sistine Chapel organised and working with all the appropriate statuary and paintings that required. So this is where another famous Renaissance man comes in, Michelangelo, of course. Next. Who painting the Sistine Chapel under Julius. Now, Julius was a soldier, not a cleric really, although he was elected Pope. Next one. And, oh yeah, okay, well we have to detour a little bit to Florence, because Florence was a place of great artwork too, and the home of Michelangelo. Florence, Florin, or Florins by their very name, come from Florence. Their patron saint was John the Baptist, and this is a later one. They started well in the 13th century, but Florence, this is a 15th century one in the period we're interested in, called a Florino or Fiorino Lago. Next. Patron saint of John the Baptist, clearly a medieval coin. This, we've got the hard to read Gothic script. We've got sort of like a two-dimensional picture there. That's John the Baptist on a little chair. Next one. Florin, by the way, the big fleur-de-lis is the flower of Florence. Another one, Latin script, now getting away from the medieval. Much easier to read, Florentia. Next one. My favourite one. You look at the pig portrait now, the halo, you're getting the 3D effect, you're getting figures in the round, everything typical of the Florentine Renaissance on this coin. And also the bold Latin script, Florentia. Next. Okay, this is the time Michelangelo carved the statue of David. 1501, this came on the scene, and everybody thought, wow. And if you ever see it, that's what you'll think too. Next one. Okay, 1503 this coin. Look at St. John. Just like the David statue. No, he's got clothes on, admittedly, but the same stance, the same rounded legs, arms, everything. Yeah, so Florence, I love Florence, I have to say. Next. And 1510, the Barile, once again, this so Renaissance compared to the earlier coins. It was just sort of. Next. Okay, this is this period in Italy was the period of the condottieri, the contractor, the soldier who goes around with his armour selling to the highest soldiers in his army, selling to the highest military services, and if you don't want him to fight your enemy, well, you have to pay him not to fight you. That's the way they live. But this is Ludovico and Saluzzo. It was also, so these are beautiful Renaissance Italian portraits. Next. This is important. I told you Copernicus went to Bologna to study. It was a famous university. That says on the reverse of the lovely gold coin, Bononia Docet. Bologna teaches. Okay, basically an ad for its university. And Copernicus studied medicine here for a couple of years. Okay, I'm running out of time, Jenny told me. Why is this important and relevant at this point? Because Julius, who we talked about, if you remember the film The Agony in Nicosia, remember that? Yeah. That opens with a battle scene. And here's Julius with his army besieging Bologna, driving out the family that's been run it for the last 50 years and making it into a papal town. which he did. It just missed Copernicus. Copernicus had been there and gone in 1506 when that happened. Next. But he, not only did Copernicus study at Bologna, he studied at Padua, close by, and also he took a degree in at University of Ferrara, as a Queen of Ferrara. Those are all close by in what were papal states. Next. He must have gone to Venice. It's not recorded, but he must have gone to Venice. And Venice in that stage were minting these big lira that had gone through the grosso and the ducats and so on. And this is Agostino Barberino lira. And to statue of Christ, Tibi Soli Gloria. To you only the glory. Next. Okay, I mentioned Venice. I have to mention Venice to segue to Portugal, right? We'll see in a minute. Next. We're now in Portugal, in Lisbon. In Lisbon, this time, the Venetian ambassador, wandering around Lisbon Marcus, and he knows that the whole trade of Venice is reliant on picking up expensive spices from India and beyond in the port of Alexandria, to take and then redistribute throughout Europe at even more expensive prices. And the Venetian ambassador comes upon the market in Lisbon and he sees spices for sale at a sixth the wholesale price that they can buy it in Alexandria. And he wonders about this, and of course it's because, unbeknown to the rest of Europe, Portugal has had Vasco da Gama go right round the Cape of Good Hope to India and pick up a couple of shiploads and bring it back to Lisbon. And they immediately realised that in Venice trade is dead. You know, they've been undercut. All the middlemen that have been in the way are now dispossessed of any trade in the spices. That's what happened. So what did Venice do? They decided to become the party capital of Europe. Good move. Anyway, this is a coin of Portugal of the period of the 1400s. On the throne is Alfonso the African. ALF Q for Quintus, so he's Alfonso V of Portugal. L underneath for Lisbon Mint. Nice grosso. Next, but definitely medieval. A denomination called the Chinfran, which is half the grosso, and also African, Alfonso the African, the fifth. Next. Is Cruzado. Cruzado was the standard gold coin at this stage, newly minted for Alfonso. Next. Okay. The next to come on the scene was John, Alfonso's son, and John was under John who three great discoveries were made. First one was Bartholomew Dias in 1488. Who discovered how to get round to Cape of Good Hope. The next one was Vasco da Gama, who discovered from Good Hope, Cape of Good Hope, how you can get to India. And the third one in 1500, not quite John Rain, was a guy called Cabral, who tried to get to India, and he did in fact get to India, but he took too big a detour outside the Atlantic and hit Brazil instead. Oh. So that's when Brazil was discovered, 1500. Okay, next one. Vinton, quite nice, Johannes. Next one. I like this one too, another Cruzado of Johannes. But when now left Europe, although he proclaimed himself Johannes Rex P et A, that's Portugal and the Algarve, D Guinea. He's now proclaimed himself the Lord Dominus of Guinea in Africa. Okay, so they're now got to Guinea, and this was before, around about the time of Dias. Next. Finally, his son Manuel, who lived to in the late 1520, 1519. That's when Da Gama went round. Next, the Vintem and the Tostan, a beautiful. This is a bigger coin now. Definitely not Europe, not medieval anymore. The big bowl Latin. And the 5 vintems it was, and now the world was suddenly so much bigger than it was. Next one. This is a really lovely coin of Ferdinand, a Spanish coin next door, their neighbour. Not mine, unfortunately. It went in a recent auction for €21,000, so someone thought it was worth having, and it is a beautiful coin. Next one. This is mine though, not quite as good a coin, but Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs. Why is this important? Well, Christopher Columbus, first of all, he went to John in Portugal, and he said, look, I'd like some sponsors. I reckon we can just go out west and we'll get to India that way. And in fact, Christopher Columbus was there at the debriefing of Diaz after he returned from the Cape of Good Hope. And he was turned down. John said, no, I'm onto a good wicket already. I don't want to go to none of these wild goose chases out there, out direct west in the Atlantic. Go somewhere else, which he did, of course. He went to Queen Isabella and she financed it. And she was feeling pretty good at this time because in 1492 they just conquered the Kingdom of Granada, the last Islamic kingdom in Spain. And she took over the place then, and she met Columbus in Granada, the new palace in Granada, and gave him the money or the wherewithal. In 1492 sailed the ocean blue, as we all know, and discovered West Indies and whole Caribbean area. Double excellente of Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic kind of kings they call them, Catholic monarchs. Next. £4 piece, Ferdinand and Isabella. That's $0.50, but you call it that if it's £4 piece. Next. All right, sorry, I'm getting close. Can I continue on for a little while, or
keep going.
Okay, well, this is the last sort of area because it also comes up to an important thing. This coin, we've got to jump up now to Belgium. Why? Because the next king of Spain actually come up from there. Now, it wasn't called Belgium in those days. There's the Burgundian dukedom. This is definitely a medieval coin. If you look at it, it's a noble, but it's not an English noble. It is a Burgundian noble. Here we have Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good. And you look at the shield, it's the Burgundian shield, not the English shield. Next. Here's one of his illegitimate sons, became the Bishop of Utrecht, David of Burgundy. Next. His another son, who is Charles of Burgundy, Charles the Rash. Charles because he actually died in battle fighting Louis XI, who we met earlier in one of the coins. But he was the father and the last Valois Duke of Burgundy, and he was the father of only had a daughter, Maria. Next one. Maria married the son of this man. This was the first Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor. He was, this coin was minted in Dortmund in Germany, and Frederick was the first Habsburg emperor, and eventually the Holy Roman Emperorship, if that's the right word, was resident in the Habsburg family from then on. Next one. This is the one I want to show you. Medallion I don't have, minted in 1479 of Frederick's son, the son of the Holy Roman Emperor, who was 19 at the time, Maximilian, and the daughter of the last Burgundian Duke, Maria, who became Duchess of Burgundy. She was 20 at the time. It gives the dates there. And they married in 1479. That was a very important marriage. They had 2 children which survived at infancy, and unfortunately, only a couple of years after they married, she fell off a horse and died at a horse riding accident. But nevertheless, a real love match, and although he remarried later in life, he loved her. Right, next one. Here's a coin of Maria, dated coin, I pointed out. You've got to read the 4 upside down, but 1479. She doesn't have too many coins because she's been lived long enough, but it's called a half briquet, and quite an attractive growth size coin. And once again, medieval in look. Next. Okay, they had a son, Philip, important man, Philip of Habsburg, suddenly in the Burgundian coat of arms, the Habsburg Austrian band was introduced, and it becomes a complicated coat of arms. And on this side, it's a big coin, this one, the so-called Toison d'Or, Golden Fleece. This was the big order of chivalry of Burgundy, the Order of the Golden Fleece. Next. The Griffin, or once again a coin of Philip, their son, Philip the Handsome. Okay, he's an important character, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But just for this coin in particular, the coin I think I like most about this coin, apart from the interesting picture here of the Griffin holding a piece of flint and hitting it against the steel to make the spark of light for the tinderbox. The thing says, in Latin, love God more than money. Great inscription. Deus, I won't try to read the Latin, but that's particularly a nice touch. Next one. Here's a coin of Philip. Once again, you can see the Austrian band. Of course, he was now, with his father being Duke of Austria, he's now got that band on there. And but this one is just about Duke of Burgundy, but also it's like Duke of Holland too. The whole lowlands was ruled by Philip. Next. Okay. Now, why did I show you that bit about Spain? Why did I show you a bit about Burgundy? Because Philip married Queen of Spain. He married the daughter, the eldest daughter of Ferdinand Isabella. So we're now getting huge dynastic mergers in the family of Europe. So there's a picture of their children. Charles, born in 1500, Ferdinand, born in 1502, and then the girls down there four, because they all became kings and princes and queens of various European principalities. And but the boy in particular, Charles, became King of Spain and also became Holy Roman Emperor as Charles V. Next one. Here's a coin. His father, Philip, died young. In 1506 he was dead. In fact, his grandmother, Isabella, died young too in 1504. And then Charles died in 1506, Philip died in 1506, and this is one of Charles as Duke of Burgundy, 1509. Next. Another real, a Spencer real, because at this point now you see how complicated the shield's getting. Castles of line of Spain, Burgundy, quartered, I mean, anything more we'd have to, second shield just but he was the most powerful man in Europe by this stage. King of Spain, ruled of all the Low Countries and all the Spanish realms. And not only that, all the discoveries of Columbus his empire. Next. Here's one, this Spanish queen, I don't have unfortunately. In Spain itself, he didn't become king till his father died, his grandfather died. And he died not till 1516. So then his mother was the Queen of Carlos and his mother Joanna. Joanna was regarded as not quite suitable for reigning. Joanna the Mad, history knows, but she wasn't. She was a very educated man, but she was just suppressed by the males and the family. Next. Now, a picture of Charles V as in later life, the Toison d'Ors. He ruled Naples too, half of Italy at the time, and here's a coin of Naples. That's his portrait. It was too much for him. He retired early and went and lived in the monastery. He took too much to rule all these things. He gave all the Austrian side to his younger brother. You saw the little picture of the second boy there, and who also became the emperor. And he retired. Gave the Spain to his son. Next one. Maximilian. In 1519, he lived till 1519, so he was the grandfather of Charles, and Charles didn't become emperor till Maximilian died. And that's another famous artist, Albrecht Dürer. This is definitely Renaissance point for 1519. Next. Then Philip of Spain became king. This is not a Spanish coin, this is a Low Countries coin. You see the little hand down the corner there, that's the mint mark of Antwerp. That's minted in the Low Countries next. And finally, one to show you back to Prussia and Poland, last coin, I think it is. Albrecht of Hohenzollern, the Grand Master of what was left of the Teutonic Knights. Teutonic Knights, which originally the conquerors of Prussia, this is a Prussian coin, were Catholic. He decided to become Lutheran, and so did all the Teutonic Knights. So basically you held a vote, we wanted to be all Lutheran now, so they disbanded the order, and he was then the subject of Poland at that point, as whole of Prussia was. Prussia was divided into what's called Royal Prussia, which included Torun, Copernicus' home, and Ducal Prussia. He was the Duke of that, capital Königsberg. If you wonder where that is, well, if you read about the Kaliningrad Oblast that the Russians took at the end of the Second World War, you'll know that's the name they changed it to. So that's sort of a little bit of illustration of the whole Reformation process that was going on all this time. Anyway, I think that's it. Next, I think that's the last one.
Yep, that's it.
That's it? Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for that. So,
Any questions for David?
any questions? Yeah, I know. Hard to know. Hard to do it. I thought you'd like to see those coins because you probably don't, not something you see normally.
Thank you very much, David.
Is that all right? Thank you.
Have a second.
Now you can walk on the
Right. Time for tea.
Yes, I know it.
Wow, that was quite a collection.
Quite a gallop through Europe.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll take your seats, please, we will resume. There's no need to introduce Jerry, everyone knows him, but he's expanded beyond farthings.
Yes, I suppose. Anyway, let's start. My paper in the talk is on the story behind the New Zealand coinage, and pretty of a bland subject, but I hope to try and make it interesting. Can I have the first slide, please? Yeah, this is actually a quote from the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, their official website. If you want to fact check me, you can go and have a look for yourself. It says, by 1933, it was obvious something needed to be done about coin smuggling and the shortage of lower value coins. It was decided that the country should start issuing banknotes and coins from a single bank, while the New Zealand Numismatic Society suggested adopting the decimal system coinage. So that was. So now I'm going to start with a little bit of history to set the scene. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, first, and probably the most important thing that occurred in the early days in New Zealand was the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi on the 6th of February 1840. It was signed on behalf of England by Governor William Hobson and by the Maori Rangatira, the chiefs, leaders, top warriors for the Maori population. It's interesting today, you know, we're talking about treaties here, and I could spend two days talking about the Treaty of Waitangi, and I'm not an expert. There was one copy of the treaty in English, and 8 were translated into the Maori language by Henry Williams and his son. And these were taken all around, mainly the North Island of New Zealand, and they were signed by 530 to 540 Maori leaders. This also included 13 women. So it's quite an interesting part of history that the women actually signed the treaty as well. And the English copy was signed by 39 people. Now, the fact that the Treaty of Waitangi occurred, this meant that some parts of the Imperial Coinage Act of 1860 began to apply in New Zealand, when Governor Hobson extended British laws to the new colony. This allowed for the standard British gold, silver and bronze coins to circulate freely in New Zealand. And in 1897, British coins became subject to parts of the Imperial Coinage Act of 1870. This meant only British coins was the official legal tender of the colony. And at that time, there was two common currencies, the other being Australian minted gold sovereigns and half sovereigns. Next slide, please. Come to 1930s, of course, the Great Depression. We heard from John the effect of inflation and depression on the coinage. In January 1931, the New Zealand government depreciated the New Zealand pound against pound sterling by 10%. In January 1933, they devalued it further to 25%. This meant that £1, 20 shillings of British coin in New Zealand, was worth 25 shillings in Britain. And this led to an outflow of coinage to take advantage of the exchange rates in both Australia and Britain, thereby making a profit. The solution was either to import more coinage from Britain, which of course with the exchange rate meant it was uneconomic to do so, or to introduce its own coinage. Thus early in 1933, the Finance Act was amended to empower the Minister of Finance to arrange silver and bronze coins for New Zealand with the Royal Mint in London. In researching this paper, you probably can't read this, but this is actually taken from the Act. And I was intrigued because you can see the standard weight there in metric. It actually goes down to measure a threepence, one over there, to 5 decimal places of a gram. Pretty hard to weigh at that stage. And especially when you look at the tolerance or the remedy allowance, which is also there. And how they have produced that, I don't know. So, could you have the next slide, thanks? So, the planning for the coinage. So, first thing, of course, all governments do, we'll form a committee. The Minister of Finance, Gordon Coates, was empowered to oversee the introduction of this coinage, and he formed this coinage committee in May 1933. There were 8 representatives. Won't go through them all, but typical as you'd expect: Treasury, Chamber of Commerce, banks, Post and Telegraph, retailers, Auditor General, and also Alan Sutherland from the New Zealand Numismatic Society. It wasn't royal at that stage, it was royal in 1947. Now there was a lot of communication between the Royal Mint and New Zealand of the designs, technical problems and the like in 1933. Reading between the lines in the history and the research I did, it was obviously that the Royal Mint, being the experts, thought these colonists in New Zealand didn't know much about what they were producing coins and just let us to take responsibility. That wasn't accepted, but they did ask for designs for patterns, coins, These were done by George Kruger Gray and Percy Metcalfe. They submitted designs. Now, at the bottom here is the 1933 patent shilling. Unfortunately, I don't have one in my collection. I'm trying to get one made in China.
Shouldn't be too hard.
They're pretty scarce, as you can imagine, because they're patents. It's a nice, quite attractive coin. It's obviously Percy Metcalfe's design on the obverse, and a kiwi. And these, I'm not sure what that one's from. I think it's from the Royal Mint Museum. The next thing was that the next slide, thanks. Well, the designs that were chosen, obviously, you know, the half crown, the whole of arms, or alternatively the shield only with the crown surmounting, the 2 shillings, the kiwi, the 1 shilling, the Maori warrior, 6pence, the huia, it's a bird, and the 3pence cross browns of Maori carvings, wahaki. The huia was extinct. I think it was extinct at that stage, but it is now. Next slide, thanks. These are my collection. Copies are over there. They all didn't scan very well, but they're quite nice pieces. Nice and shiny ones, open graded. I just call them shiny ones. The coins were of the British quaternary alloy. Silver 500, copper 400, nickel 50 and zinc 50. There was considerable discussion on the various designs that were sent to the committee in New Zealand, and that those of George Kruger Gray were favoured for the reverse. Oops,
Go back.
Go back up, yeah. And obviously the obverse was that the design of Percy Metcalfe. I've got a copy of that a bit later on. Okay, next one, thanks. Okay, mintage. Mintage was for the half crowns, 2 million, franc 2,100,000, shilling 2 million, 6pence 3 million, and the 3pence 6 million. There's the diameters as well, and as were specified. As I mentioned, the prime reason for New Zealand introducing its own coinage resulted from the devaluation of the New Zealand pound and against sterling, and the result of smuggling of coins to Australia mainly for profit. It's worth doing a calculation based on the half crowns, which were the most popular coin for smuggling. £100 value worth of half crowns weighed 11.31 kilos. So if you're going to smuggle these coins in large amounts, say £1,000 or 8,000 half crowns, it's quite a weight. Talk about that a bit later. In 1935, English coinage was no longer legal tender in New Zealand. And in 1940, New Zealand introduced bronze pennies and halfpennies of their own. Because I didn't. Now I want to go on and talk a little bit about this issue of smuggling. Have the next slide, thanks. I'll probably read this out. This is a well-documented story or case when the vessel Marama was searched in Sydney by customs. They suspected there was of smuggling coins, and they found this gas cylinder. And I'll just read it from the newspaper of the time. It's a photo of the gas cylinder and a bit of writing there. You probably can't read that, but I'll read it out anyway. Concerning the mysterious cylinder recently returned from Australia, it was ascertained today that no silver coin was found in the cylinder. But nevertheless, it was of considerable interest to the authorities, as it is evident from the photograph published in this issue that it's being forwarded between New Zealand and Australia for the purposes for which it was not originally constructed, namely as a cylinder for gas. The bottom of the cylinder had been cut off and a screw cap fitted to allow of the insertion of a tin cylinder with wide flanges, enabling it to be used for illegal exploitation of coin and perhaps for illegal importation. This had made many trips between Australia and New Zealand. Obviously, there was nothing in it. There was no direct evidence that it contained coin when it left New Zealand by the Marama. Does not seem to have left the ship in Sydney, so if it had been loaded, the emptying of it must have been a rather risky business. It may have made both trips empty, but there seems little reason for the containment of an empty container in the wrong direction. It is probable that the smuggling of silver coin out of New Zealand will soon cease. There is profit only in imperial coins, and these will soon be rapidly taken out of circulation and replaced by Dominion coins. No one was ever charged on this one, but there were many charges, examples of those that were caught. As you can imagine, I think one was £1,100 worth of silver in their luggage. And it was in a trunk with a false bottom. And in fact, just as another little aside, one of the cases documented was on the Wanganella. My uncle was the radio officer of the Wanganella, and 4 people were charged. Wanganella used to be a liner that ran between New Zealand and Australia on a weekly basis. He was a radio officer, but this happened before his time. But 4 were charged on that, including the 4th officer. They lost all their smuggling money and were all fined. I think he was fined £110, which is a lot of money in the 1930s. But it was obviously very profitable when you think of it, and especially during the Depression, it was quite easy to go and get 8 half-crowns, English half-crowns for a New Zealand pound note, collect them all together, bring them to Australia, exchange them with the dealers, or even the banks. Some of them might have done it, and get English pound notes, and take those English pound notes back to get to New Zealand, and you make 25% on your money. No downside, unless you get caught. Just now, I'd like to. I could read a bit more about that one, but it's over there in the book I've got on Pepin's book. There's a lot of examples of that. I'd now like to just next slide, thanks. I'd just like to finish up. The rarest of the New Zealand pre-decimal coins is the 1935 Waitangi crown. Has a mintage of 1,128, and that includes 468 proof coins. The specification is 38.6 millimetres diameter with a weight of 28.28 grams, the wreathed edge. It was 50% silver, the same as the other silver coins at the time. And the obverse was designed by Percy Metcalfe, and the design of the reverse was that by George Barron. The reverse, which is described, shows the Maori Rangatira chief of the Ngāpuhi iwi tribe, Tamati Waka Nene, shaking hands with Governor William Hobson with the treaty, signing the Treaty of Waitangi. Nene was a high-ranking chief in the Bay of Islands, and after his baptism, I think he became Protestant in 1839, added the name Tamati Waka to his name. Tamati Waka, of course, means Thomas Walker. The whole story of how Hobson became Lieutenant Governor of New Zealand is in my paper. But Nene was the second Maori to sign, the first being Honi Heki. And of course, every New Zealander learns at school about Honi Heki. Because he's the guy that went and cut after, because he wasn't happy with the outcome of the treaty and what happened subsequent to the signing. He's the one that went to the house at Kororaka on 4 occasions and chopped down the flagpole. I think in the early 2000s, some Maori activist also went down to the Waitangi house, as it's called, in Russell, and chopped down the flagpole again. I've always been intrigued by this coin because it was issued in 1935, and 1935 has nothing to do with the Treaty of Waitangi. It's the centenary of the treaty signing. They issued a half crown, which I've got an example over there, to celebrate the 100th year signing of the treaty. But anyway, from what I've researched, they intended to set out or provide a specimen collector's set, including the crown, in 1933. And the toing and froing between Gordon Coates, the Minister of Finance, and the Royal Mint took 2 years to sort out. And I think there's a whole host of letters and correspondence that you could write a book about. It went backwards and forwards and saying why and how this bit of a debacle took so long. Obviously it's a scarce coin, and the reason for the low mintage was the price of the loose crowns was 7 and 6, while the 364 proof sets were 18 shillings and sixpence mounted on cardboard, and 25 sets that were encased in leather. Also 1935 was the end of the Great Depression, so money was not readily available. And so those that were fortunate enough to have 7 and 6, buy a couple of Waitangi crowns, and put them on the cupboard, done very well. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. Thank you, and my references are included. So.
Jerry, we've got a request to have the first slide shown. Got a query on my left here.
No query, just was a photograph it.
Oh, you want to take a photo?
Go back to slide 1.
Please.
That one?
Yeah, please.
You're famous, Jerry.
Even more famous.
Infamous, yeah. Any questions? No. Yeah.
What was the financial reward for smuggling coins in those days? Why did they do it?
Make money.
But who was the buyer of them? I mean, they were only 50% silver coins, weren't they?
No, it's not the silver, it was the exchange rate.
Because New Zealand devalued its pound, they're still using the same coins that they were in Britain.
Okay, maybe I didn't explain, try and explain it better. At that stage, ever since 1907 when New Zealand began doing it, the coinage they used was English coinage, including the half crown. They did have Australian silver coinage, but when they devalued the New Zealand pound in the 30s, they devalued by 25%. And that meant that the New Zealand pound, so in New Zealand you go to have a New Zealand £1 note and you go to the bank and get 8 half crowns, and they were English half crowns. So you then get a whole lot of those, put them in a bag and
Take them back to England.
take them both to England, which they allowed £15 I think it was, and £5 to Australia, but that's legally. And what they did and why that cylinder was basically was on the ship, went backwards and forwards. So it was just a matter of getting the coins on the ship. You would then bring those coins, English half crowns, to Sydney, go to a money lender and change those English half crowns for English pound notes, take your English pound notes back to New Zealand and get £1 or 25 shillings, effectively, £1 5 shillings. So you made 5 shillings profit on a pound.
When I was a kid, I used to get pound notes sent out for birthday presents from England and Ireland, and you take them to the bank and you get £1 5 shillings Australian, which I thought was great. So it was a similar sort of system.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when in the 1950s, the New Zealand pound was double. So New Zealand pound was twice the value of a English pound.
Really?
Yeah, it was in the 1950s, yeah.
Jerry, another story you might want to research is that when they went to decimal, they made their dollar coin the size of our $2 coin and our $2 coin.
Still the
and
same.
of course, they're coming over here and using them in parking meters and so
Yeah, they're interesting. There's, I don't know, yeah, I've heard a few minutes now. There's an interesting coin, I think it's the 1995 New Zealand $2. And it was minted in South Africa. And which is right, the coins were produced with the right metal content, correct metal content, but it was actually they had made a mistake. So when these $2 coins came back, you couldn't use them in vending machines because they get rejected because of the
Wrong weight or wrong diameter or something.
Wrong metal content and stuff. That created stuff, and of course then there was the introduction of the decimal coins with the Bahama mule, which you might have or have a copy of. Got a couple. Anyone wants to buy one. It was interesting. I was in the coin club at that stage, Auckland Coin Club, and everyone said suddenly they realised this Bahama mule was out there for 2 cents, and so lo and behold, all the coin clubs got a freebie from the mint.
Oh.
So we all, yeah. So we got a nice new shiny Harbour mule, but that was another stuff up, and they reckon that it might have been by design because that was done with Royal Mint. At that stage, well, there was some views that it was done sabotage, if you like, because they were shifting the Royal Mint to Wales. There was a lot of industrial unrest about it. But yeah, it's the.
What about the Bahama mule?
That's it. That's what I'm talking about.
Just a question about those vintage figures, Jerry. It was interesting that all of them were in millions, even millions, except the florin,
Yes.
which had an extra 100,000 on it for some
I don't know
reason.
why that is.
Yeah,
They actually,
5% more.
it was actually, they started in, well, I think it was about May when they finally agreed those designs. And the first coins, I think, arrived in the half crowns, came first. They arrived in November 33. But the story of the smuggling, it highlights just what John was saying in his first of all, dollarisation, and in the effect of inflation. Because the reason they devalued was to try and protect the export income. But also probably the Bank of England probably wanted devaluation so they could guarantee their loans. So there was the political stuff, and then the toing and froing between the Mint and this committee is quite might not be right, because these colonials, we know how to produce coins. Because they was in and complained because the Maori, the shilling with the Maori warrior crouching, they wanted to have the head of a Maori warrior, and the Royal Mint refused that because they wouldn't have, on one side the portrait of the king, and on the other side portrait a head of a
Which one
native.
was of this?
Okay.
Let me present you with the certificate that you made.
Thank you. Caroline.
Very good.
Next we have is John Kennedy, and John will be talking to us on the Irish decimal coinage before the euro was introduced in 2002.
Thank you. Well, the date, the 15th of February 1971, is very well known in numismatic circles. It's a date 5 years and 1 day after the 14th of February 1966. It marks the day on which the United Kingdom finally abandoned the old pound, shillings and pence, which has served it for 1,000 years and more, and moved over to a decimal system. But it was also the day when the Republic of Ireland made a similar move. There was no coincidence involved, of course. Ireland was involved in a de facto currency union with the United Kingdom, had been since the 1920s. And British currency circulated quite freely throughout the island of Ireland, alongside Irish ones. Unsurprisingly then, Ireland followed Britain in a decimal system involving a pound of 100 new pennies, and initially introduced 6 new coins identical in size, weight and metal composition to the British equivalents. As in Britain, some of the coins, the new coins had exact pre-decimal equivalents, and Ireland, like Britain, introduced some of the new decimal coins before official decimal day in 1971. In Ireland it started in 1969. And official sets of the new coins were available for purchase. There were several sets. This is an example of one of them. The obverse of the coins, next one please. Yes. The obverse of the new coins featured a harp design that had appeared on virtually all Irish coins since 1939, the work of the aforementioned Percy Metcalfe, who we've just heard mention of in another context. And this design would be continued on virtually all the decimal coins of Ireland in the next 30 years or so. There are just one or two exceptions, which I'll mention in due course. Let's look first at the Copper-nickel 5p, 10p and 50p. These preserved in modified form designs that created by Percy Metcalfe in 1928 in an animal series, which was of course still current in Ireland in the 1960s, and which was regarded, I think one can say, with considerable affection in Ireland. The 5p and 10p designs were similar to those on the old shilling and florin. The 50p design adapted a design from the old farthing, which by 1971 was well and truly obsolete. It hadn't really circulated since the 1940s, although Ireland continued producing them up to 1966. There was considerable controversy about the success of the adaptation of the new designs. It even became an issue in the Irish Parliament, with the opposition laying into the government for the lack of artistic success. The 50p in particular was fairly controversial. It was felt that the design that had worked well on the small farthing didn't work well on the 50p. And somebody accused them of blowing up the design so that the bird looked like, the bird is a woodcock, looked like a fat snipe. So that was not well received. The design of the bronze halfpenny, penny and twopence was even more controversial. It was felt that because these new bronze coins had no exact equivalent in the old pre-decimal system, animal designs couldn't be used. There was some suggestion that they should create brand new animal designs, but this fell on deaf ears. There was experimentation at the Royal Mint with rather cliched and kitschy shamrock designs, but happily they didn't come about. So time was running out, and at the last moment they accepted designs created by an Irish artist, Gabriel Hayes. These are based on medieval manuscripts, the Book of Kells in the middle, and Celtic manuscripts from the continent for the halfpenny and the twopence, which haven't reproduced as well as I'd hoped, I must say. This caused a fair bit of unhappiness. Firstly, the artistic and designer community was unhappy that there hadn't been any competition held, that Miss Hayes had just got the job, and there were dark suggestions that she was a friend of the Prime Minister and had got it, through sort of favouritism of that kind. The designs, I think, are really not unattractive, quite pleasant really. The only one problem I would mention with them is that they've had to be reproduced on very small coins. The halfpenny there on the right is somewhat smaller in diameter than the Australian 1 cent of 1966. So on quite a small coin. The next significant development after the 1971 launch was the opening in 1978 of the first, well not the first, but the first modern Irish mint at Sandy Ford near Dublin, which meant that gradually Irish coins were not being entirely produced in the British Royal Mint at London or Lantrisant. Ireland started producing its own. But perhaps more significantly, Ireland in 1978 joined the EMS, the European Monetary System, thereby breaking the link which had existed with sterling since the first coins in 1928. This meant fairly quickly that the Irish pound, or punt as it was often referred to in Ireland, lost value vis-a-vis sterling. And this would normally be the case over the next 30 years. The coin would be worth a bit less. Occasionally it was worth a bit more, but normally it was worth a bit less. This meant that British coins, by a sort of Gresham's law, I suppose you could say, tended to disappear from circulation in Ireland, with the possible exception of the very low value ones, which nobody worried too much about. But the larger value British coins tended, for I suppose reasons that we've just been considering, tended to disappear from circulation in Ireland. Accordingly, Ireland felt free to not have the same size and shapes of coins as Britain had. So when Ireland followed Britain in 1982 and introduced a 20p coin, it was, perhaps bring this one up please. Yes. It was markedly different in shape, metal and size from its British equivalent on the left. It adopted the design from the old 2 and 6pence, the old half crown, the horse design of Percy Metcalfe, which was well received because people liked that design. The pound coin, which Ireland introduced in 1990, featured bring that up too, please. Featured another animal design. This wasn't the work of Percy Metcalfe. It was a new design by the Irish artist Thomas Ryan, and again quite different in shape and in metal composition and in chunkiness also. It was quite a slim coin from the British equivalent. When following British priesthood, Ireland reduced the size of its 5p and 10p coins in 1992 and 1993 respectively. The new coins were similar in shape to the British coins, but not identical. I think the 5p was slightly larger than the British equivalent and the 10p slightly smaller. Again, these kept the basic Percy Metcalfe designs, but reversed the order. There was a bit of joke in Ireland. This was political inclinations of the government. They assured us it didn't. It was just to make greater uniformity, have all the animals facing left. The halfpenny disappeared from circulation around this time. It was a victim of inflation, basically. Ireland, like Britain again, changed the copper coins changed the bronze coins to bronze coated or copper coated stainless steel of the same weight as the coins they replaced. But of course the new coins were magnetic, so you can tell whether you've got a new one or an old one if you've got a magnet handy. But otherwise there was nothing to tell you. The weight was maintained as the same. Some other changes were officially announced but never happened. In June 1990, the Ministry of Finance announced that the penny and twopence, the Gabriel Hayes designs, would be phased out, and they would bring back animal designs from Percy Metcalfe. They were going to bring back the hare and the hound, which had appeared on the threepence and the sixpence in the pre-decimal series. This never happened, nor did the plans to reduce the size of the 50p, again a la British precedent, that never happened either. They were quite keen to do this actually because they were having trouble with the seven-sided flan. They had to import them from Britain, and they weren't having a great deal of, well, they were having success, but they were having a lot of trouble in producing coins successfully with this seven-sided flan. Neither of those developments, proposed developments, ever happened. The reason being that the euro was beginning to loom large on the scene in the 1990s, and it just was decided not to make any more changes and wait for the euro. So you had a rather curious situation that Ireland was still producing large 50p's when the Brits had stopped doing so. So the last large, from the end of the 1990s, you've large Irish 50p. Unlike some countries we could mention, Ireland has been rather sparing in the issuing of commemorative coins, and there are in fact only 3 to show from nearly 30 years of this period between pound, shillings and pence and euros. 2 of these were for general circulation and did circulate. All 3 were to some degree controversial. In 1985, the Dublin Corporation, the body now known as the Dublin City Council, announced that there would be a celebration of the millennium of the city in 1988. This raised considerable eyebrows amongst the historians, who were under the impression that the Vikings had founded Dublin in 1841, a mere 147 years earlier, which even for Dublin City Council people was a rather long degree of procrastination. You'll notice that the post office, the Irish Post Office on Post, when it issued stamps, doesn't claim that Dublin was founded 1,000 years ago. It basically claims that an Irish king conquered Dublin 1,000 years ago. This also raised some eyebrows amongst the historians. Yes, an Irish king did conquer Dublin, perhaps in 988, or maybe it was 989. No, the historians differ. But so what, in a way? An Irish king had captured Dublin in 902. They'd lost it again to the Vikings in 914. The conquest in 988 or 989 also was short-lived. The Vikings were soon back in control again then. So, you know, the cynical view eventually was that the Dublin Corporation wanted to have a millennium celebration for tourism purposes. Other cities were doing the same thing about the same time, and they were determined to have it. And,
even if it wasn't actually a millennium.
It wasn't actually a millennium, which was 147 years.
Something had to happen 1,000 years ago. Come on, somebody think of something.
So, okay, could you presently show the coin? I think you have to say the coin which was produced was about as uninspiring as the millennium would have been. It's an adaptation of the coat of arms of the Lord Mayor of Dublin, which dates not from the Viking era, it dates from about the 17th century. That's circulated freely. The second commemorative was a pound coin issued in 2000 for the year 2000 millennium, or dual millennium, if you like to call it that. It might be immediately obvious to you what this is, and I think it wasn't immediately obvious to a lot of people. It's a representation of a find from a place called Broiter, which is actually now in Northern Ireland, outside the Republic. In 1896, 2 farm labourers ploughing dug up a hoard of gold objects, and the most famous of them is the so-called Broiter boat, which is a little boat. It's about 18.5 centimetres long, and it's pretty confidently dated to about the year 0. So it was 2,000 years old. There's no, of course, indication on the coin of what is being commemorated. One journalist said it was actually a slice of lemon and a few cocktail sticks. The coin was also controversial because they were producing it in the latter months of 1999, and there was a shortage of small change in Dublin around Christmas that year. And the news got out that the reason why there was change shortage was that Mint was busily producing this. And so it wasn't altogether well received. I just put up there a British coin which also shows a find from Broiter. It's the Broiter Talk. And actually, I don't know if you can see this, they've just actually brought out a £5 commemorative marking Northern Ireland with King Charles on the obverse, showing the St. Broiter talk. So there is a bit of a link there between the two. Northern Ireland, of course, thinks it should have the Broiter hoard, since it was found in their territory, but the National Museum of Ireland is holding on to it. The third commemorative, a pound dated 1995, was not issued for circulation. And it's in fact pretty rare. There are only about 4,000 seem to have ever been minted, and I don't own one, I'll admit. It was produced by the Royal Mint in Britain to mark 50 years of the United Nations. It was part of a set of coins. They produced 20 silver coins, proof coins in a set, and Ireland was for countries around the world. In fact, there were 36 coins produced in all in this program, but 20 of them were produced in silver in a set. They're dated 1995. They don't seem to have the Irish one at least doesn't seem to have become available until very late in 1997. It is a rare coin. The government acquired them, and most of them, a lot of them, were sent to Irish embassies around the world, presumably to be handed out as diplomatic gifts. The writing is on one side at least, is in English, as you can see, and you have a slightly adopted version of the Percy Metcalfe harp on the other side, and the dates 1945, 1995. Ireland, in fact, didn't join the United Nations in 1945. It was vetoed by the Soviet Union when it tried to join in 1945. So it had to wait 10 years. So in a way, it should be 1955 for 1995, where Ireland was concerned. I just mentioned one short series, which was issued in this period by the Irish state, but was not actually part of this decimal series. Again in 1990, Ireland issued 3 coins to mark its presidency of the European Community, which of course became the European Union. These used again the Thomas Ryan, the same design for all of them. There was a €5, a €10, and a 5 EQ, 10 EQ, and 50 EQ, and again the Thomas Ryan stag. These were for collector coins. Curiously, they have no indication of what is being commemorated. They're not too hard to get hold of. They were issued 20,000 of the silver ones and 5,000 of the gold, €50. These again caused controversy because it meant the Irish government was issuing EQ coins at a time when the EQ had not been officially adopted as an official European currency. I mean, as you probably know, there are all manner of patterns and many patterns around, but these were official government issue, which they shouldn't ought to have issued because it was, as I say, it was a government jumping the gun. And of course the name anyway didn't become EQ, they went for Euro. Leaving those aside, they're reasonably obtainable. It's not too hard to build up a type set of Irish coins. The United Nations commemorative is a problem. You'll spend $500 to $1,000 getting one of those if you can find one. Otherwise, it's not hard. There's only 12 coins or 14 coins if you count the metallic and non-metallic pennies and halfpennies. You'll have there are a few proofs and one peat-fort of the pound, the 2,000 pound, and some of the sets are hard to get, and some of the proofs are hard to get. Where you really run into and some coins from the late 70s, early 80s, common enough coins can be hard to get in extremely fine or uncirculated condition. The familiar phenomenon, people collected the first ones and then didn't bother putting aside the later ones. Where you're going to run into trouble, and a lot of trouble, is if you want to build a complete date set of Irish coins. There are a surprising number of coins which are extremely rare in this category. In 1986, they issued about 6,700 sets of the year's coins, but they only issued the 10 pence, the halfpenny, the 10 pence and the 50 pence in the set, and therefore there's quite a limited number of those. Some of the 10p, some surplus 10p did seem to escape into circulation, but those coins are hard to get, those three. All 2.8 million examples of the 1985 halfpenny were meant to go to the melting furnace. But of course, as does tend to happen in these circumstances, a few of them mysteriously avoided ending up in the melting pot, probably fell off the back of the truck at some stage. That can be a hard coin to get hold of. The small size 10p coin was first issued for circulation in 1993, but a small number dated 1992 were issued so that manufacturers could check their vending machines. These were handed out, and as it also happened with the 1937 Edward VIII Trappants in Britain, not all the coins handed out to be tested found their way back to the mint. So this is a rare coin. I've seen suggestions that there are only about a couple of them known to exist. I think that's an underestimate. And you have a similar story with the 20 pence. It was issued for circulation in 1996. A number were issued for testing purposes in 1995. And these again are very rare. I've seen a suggestion that there are only 3 of them. That definitely is a bit low. But it is a rare coin, and you will have a lot of trouble getting hold of it. Well, this Irish pre-decimal coins, pre-euro coins I should say, did not have a long life. The first ones were issued in 1969. The last coins were issued in 2000, and Ireland went over to the euro in 2002. So it's a lifespan well within the range of our lifetime, most of the lifetimes of us here in this room. On the 1st of January 1992, that's not a good production, the Irish Prime Minister walked into his local news agency and, for the record, used for the first time Irish euro currency. It's recorded for posterity that he bought a pear, milk, a sultana cake and a lottery ticket. After that New Year's Day in 2002, the Irish pre-euro coinage disappeared rapidly from circulation, and it was no longer legal tender after the 9th of February 2002. The coins that began to circulate on that day all bore on their obverse the Percy Metcalfe harp. So the Percy Metcalfe harp, which in its present form came about in 1939, in its earlier form came about in 1928, continued to have an existence in Ireland. And of course the harp in Ireland has been on most coins since the reign of Henry VIII in the 16th century. So there's a strong element of continuity remaining despite all the changes. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, please.
What's the reason for the harp on the coin? What's the background?
I honestly, look, it goes a long way back. I think it has been a symbol. Why? I suppose because the harpist was an important person at the courts of Irish chieftains.
Right.
I mean, it goes back as a battle emblem to the Middle Ages, and it is, where we just put OHMS on our letters, they put the harp.
It's an Irish national emblem.
It is very much the Irish national anthem, but how I think there was no question in the 1920s that they would adopt it for the obverse. But the mere fact that yes, it has been used so much. It's based on there's a famous harp called the Brian Boru harp in Trinity College in Dublin, and that's the model for this.
Right.
I know that's not an entirely satisfactory answer. That's as good as I can do.
Some of the early Irish coins depicted King David, the biblical King David, with a harp.
Yes.
So I don't know if there was some sort of
That's
Irish tradition about King David and a harp or sort of thing. That may be why they originally picked a harp, but I don't know.
But it goes back to Henry VIII, of course. I mean, you have coins from Henry VIII, which, with him and with the harp H on one side, and the Queen of the time, her initial on the other.
Yeah.
They kept changing it for some reason.
John, you had a question.
I believe that 1 in 5 Australians identify with Irish ancestry, and 1 in 3 New Yorkers do. Is there a special interest in collecting Irish coins and people of Irish ancestry?
Yes, I mean, if you're on an auction site, you're going to be competing with Americans, and usually they win.
I think you find John's an example of that.
I think they worked out in 1860 that 1 in 10 of the non-Aboriginal population of Australia had been born in Ireland. It's gone down since then.
John, just out of fun, my grandmother had an Irish link. So when I was in New York on 5th Avenue, I was seeing a big Irish parade. So I found an abandoned green hat in a rubbish bin. I got it out, cleaned it, put it on, and enjoyed them.
I think they have the biggest Irish parade in the world, don't they?
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Don't go away. Got to get your certificate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Mr. Pern is going to wow us with the Fabiacci, what do they call it?
Fibonacci.
Yeah, Fibonacci statistics.
Well, Rod and dear friends, Leonardo Fibonacci, born probably around 1170 AD, also known as Leonardo of Pisa, has very close links with our modern love of numismatics. Fibonacci was one of the most famous of all the mathematicians of the Middle Ages. He introduced our modern system of notation, originally from India but through the Arabic world. He introduced this in 1202 in his book Liber Abaci, the Book of the Abacus. Fibonacci wrote about barter, about monetary exchange and profit margins, and about interest. He's regarded as one of the two founders of the modern profession of accountancy. His famous book in 1202, one of the founders. 200 years later, Luca Pacioli, the Italian mathematician, introduced the system of double unit accounting, double entry accounting. And as I know, there are at least 3 accountants in our room today who regard those two as the founders of the discipline and profession of accountancy as we know it today. But Fibonacci is also known for other things. He's known for the invention of what's called the Fibonacci sequence of numbers, which have a fundamental significance in much of biology, in cosmology, and in art. Several elegant medals have been struck to commemorate the life and work of Fibonacci, and the Fibonacci sequence is also represented today in metallic fobs, in metallic jewellery, and in many objects of art. In fact, there's a minor cult at present about Fibonacci jewellery. Who was Fibonacci? Well, Leonardo Fibonacci was probably born in Pisa, and probably around the year 1170. His father, Guglielmo, was a merchant in Pisa, but he was appointed by the authorities in Pisa to be their representative in North Africa, in what's today the city of Béjaïa in modern-day Algeria. And it was there that the young boy Fibonacci was tutored by an Arabic tutor, whose name, tragically, is forever lost to posterity. But the young boy, Fibonacci, learned from his Arabic tutor about a number of things, as we'll see in this next slide. He learned from his Arabic tutor the 9 figures which had come to the Arabic world from India. They're the figures that we take for granted and use today in our standard notation. Fibonacci also introduced the concept of zero, which enabled, as we can see there, as he said in his book of 800 years ago, we can see there that with those figures and the zero, any number could be written. We take this for granted today, our normal numeral notation. It's just something we don't even think about. It's so universal. But prior to that time, of course, was the Roman notation, with its very complex system of V for 5 and X for 10, as you know, C for 100, D for 500, and so on. For example, the figure, if we wanted to write 398, in our Arabic system of notation, the one we use today, that figure in Roman notation is 6 symbols: XXX, sorry, CCC, XC, VIII. So Fibonacci simplified all that with the numeral system that we do today. But he also did a second unrelated thing. He introduced what's called the place value of numbers. Imagine the numeral number 1. Number 1 by itself means 1 coin, 1 bottle of milk, 1 shirt. If we put it, however, in the second place with a naught beside it, 1 doesn't mean 1, it means 10. If we put it in the third place, it means the figure 1 means 100. This is the place value of numbers, which again is so fundamental to us from our 4 and 5-year-old schooling that we take it totally for granted today. But we owe it to Fibonacci. Fibonacci also did something else. He introduced a sequence of numbers which is in which any number is the sum of the 2 previous numbers. 8 in this sequence being the sum of 3 and 5, 34 being the sum of 13 and 21. Now anyone can produce a sequence of numbers by any law at all. We could say, let's make a sequence of numbers in which we add 7 to every number in the sequence, and it would go on. But what is special, we might say, about the Fibonacci sequence? Well, Fibonacci, in their book, again, Liber Abaci, the book of the Abacus, 1202, he set himself a question, which we've shown here in the next slide. This is a direct English translation of what Fibonacci set himself to do. He said, imagine we've got a closed area there with a pair of rabbits in it. And he said, what if those rabbits had a pair of rabbits every month? And what if rabbits became fertile at the end of their second month? The question he asked himself, setting that little conundrum, was, at the end of a year, 12 months, how many rabbits would there be in that enclosed space? And if one works it out, one can do that at home on a piece of paper, the answer is 144, as we see in the next slide. And what Fibonacci did was, he said this is the months, after the first month, second month, third month, up to 12 months of the year, using his question that he asked himself about these rabbits. That's the number of pairs of rabbits at any one month. And amazingly, if one looks at that bottom sequence, it's the sequence that came 600 years later to be renamed the Fibonacci sequence of numbers. The Fibonacci sequence turns out, it was realised centuries later, to have many other significances. It turns out that the mathematics of spirals are very closely related to the Fibonacci sequence of numbers. The mathematics, I understand, of spirals, there are three sorts of spirals that have fundamental mathematical ratios to them. One is the logarithmic spiral, another one is the golden spiral, and the other one is the Fibonacci spiral. They're all very similar, but this captured the imagination of the world and the artistic world, the wonder of spirals, and people came to look at the place of spirals in the broader the world, and they're everywhere. Jerry will represent, just go back one, Jerry will recognise the koru, is that correct, Jerry? The silver fern folding here, unfolding on the top right. The ammonites in prehistoric seas, which were filled with countless trillions of these creatures with their characteristic spiral. And wondrously, from the Hubble telescope, this is one of the countless spiral galaxies that we now know to be in the vast universe, again with this mathematical sequence. The turbine, this is a turbine being repaired in Germany, again as the water enters this is the fundamental basis, I understand. I know that there David and others consultant engineers in the group, but the water enters the large one and propels round the middle before it exits, but drives the turbine in the middle. And of course, the spiral has captured the world of art. This is a Fibonacci spiral pendant here on the bottom left. I bought it for my wife for her birthday this year, but she wasn't terribly happy when she realised that I'd actually bought it to illustrate this talk. Spirals are just wonderful, as we'll see in the next slide. Now, it so happens that if one unfolds the hand, a spiral is being developed in the same ratio. This is a picture from a very erudite medical paper in 1937 by one of the world's top hand surgeons. And he pointed out that the hand built on this pattern has beautifully distributed pressures completely through it, so that if one doesn't wear a ring, the pressure at any one point where one is clenching a fist is completely equal. And as we've seen, spirals are universal in nature, and it turns out that the egg is also spiral. And as you may know, it's a party trick. It's impossible to crack an egg in the hand if you're not wearing a ring, with the two pressures of the hand has the pressure equally distributed. It's not at any one point. The eggshell has it there. Have you all seen this party trick? It's impossible to crack the egg by hand. I can demonstrate that. Chair, George, Rod, would you like to come up?
No, thank you.
Would somebody like to volunteer? Would you like to volunteer?
I'll come up.
Which is your strongest hand? You're right-handed, okay. Hold that in the hand. You're not wearing a ring?
No.
A ring, of course, focuses the point and will crack the egg. Just squeeze it as hard as you can.
It's going to break, it'll break.
You can see it's not possible to crack an egg because of the transmission of the...
True.
It's an unbelievable phenomenon. You don't believe it unless one sees it.
Yeah, interesting.
I've known people to use that trick, but to have scratch the egg a bit,
Yes.
so that you've got a dirty hand.
That was excellent, John.
So, although it's drawing a rather broad bow, I've extended the numismatic theme, of course, to metallic jewellery as well. And these are three examples of the world of Fibonacci. This is the Fibonacci sequence. This piece of jewellery won an international award, and you can see it's got the 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Again, the Fibonacci sequence. And if you Google the Fibonacci sequence, there are numerous examples of this. Well, what about the numismatic side of things? The Italian Society of Accountancy in 2002 wished to honour what they regarded as their great founder, Fibonacci, and they struck this beautiful medal. It shows, of course, the name here was commissioned by a well-known medallic artist who has done a lot of sort of Renaissance type modern medals commemorating Renaissance themes. Bettini here, but on this medal here it's got the name, as I understand, in Italian, of accountancy, Ragioneria, and of course an ammonite with the Fibonacci spiral there on it as well. This is the reverse of that medal, again with Fibonacci here, with the medalist's initials here, but this is taken from the statue in Pisa, in the Compostito in Pisa, of the statue of Fibonacci himself. And here he is again in another statue, and also in 2002 another beautiful commemorative medal was cast, commissioned and cast, again showing Fibonacci here as a mathematician with his instruments of mathematics and his birthplace in Pisa, again with the dates commemorating the 800th anniversary of the publication of his book Liber Abaci, which proposed all these wonderful things which we commemorate about him today. So he's commemorated on a whole range of other jewellery as well. It's a good party trick to do, and you will see, if you want to buy your partner a nice piece of jewellery, I'd suggest you can buy a much more expensive one than that stainless steel one which I showed there. Thank you all.
Now, so any questions?
How was the jewellery illustrated, John? And if you just show that last slide with the jewel, I was intrigued to see how it worked on that one, on the left or right. How does that work?
Well, this is the Fibonacci spiral.
Yes.
Spiral here. The ratio, those mathematicians in the room will know there's something called the golden ratio. Golden ratio excites mathematicians wildly. The golden ratio is, if you imagine a line, and there is a point when you can divide any line where the ratio of the whole length of the line to the largest part is the same ratio as having divided the largest part to the smallest part of the line. Why that should excite mathematicians, I don't really know, but it does. It's called the golden ratio. It's 1.608. It's infinitely long, that ratio. But the ratio is the same ratio as the size of these tiny boxes, all getting bigger here, which gives the basis of the spiral.
The Greeks didn't have the mathematical concept of the golden ratio, but they still instinctively used it in their architecture.
Yes, there's something about spirals that does excite artists and other people and mystics now looking at the spiral galaxies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think our lunch is covered as yet. So, is there any other questions that anybody would like to bring up? Any topics before we break for lunch, which hasn't arrived?
Could I ask then, just to, does anybody have any experience with the Franklin Mint, the Perth Mint at all? The reason I ask that is that, as my Queensland colleagues will know, next year is the foundation of the first open-air jail, which was the foundation of the modern state of Queensland. The convict party and the soldiers landed in September 1824, which is the bicentenary next year in that time. I've applied to the Royal Australian Mint for to consider a coin, but they say no. They've said no, but the corridor opinion has it that it might be worthwhile trying to get a commemorative coin from the Franklin Mint.
Perth Mint.
It's the Perth Mint, sorry, the Perth Mint. Yes, does anybody have any experience with that?
I don't have any experience, but I mean, they've got a good web page, Perth Mint, and of course they're bullion traders, so
Sure.
we're very happy to people to buy gold and silver, so and they do mint an awful lot of, if you like, non-circulating tender coins.
Yes.
So
We're
I'm
doing
sure
it.
they'd be open to a proposition. What I'm saying, a business
That's very good.
organisation.
Our colleagues in the Queensland branch of the Australian Numismatic, we're going to do a commemorative medallion for this, but I was wanting also a coin. But,
John, I had some experience with the Perth Mint when the Koala Foundation, we asked them to do a gold with a koala on it. And they agreed, and we got I think 10% commission out of any sales that we helped generate, which we put on our website. A number of people supported it, so they were quite pleased. So they do listen to any potential deals. It's a win-win situation for everybody.
It would be my assumption that Perth Mint's own marketing department has already thought up whatever coins they're going to make for the next few years.
Yes.
So then, if it's something for, what did you say, next year?
yes. I've left it a bit late, I don't know.
Yeah, it might be too late in terms of that. But yeah, it wouldn't hurt to ask. But yeah, they've probably already thought up all of their products for next year.
They might give you leads where to go to and when to come back.
John, have you already got details of the suggested design at all?
Yes, it's of course any first in Australia today is a sensitive issue, obviously, because of our Indigenous forebears were there long before European settlement was there. So, as a fact of history and as a courtesy, I guess, it's essential that any commemoration, using that word specifically, of bicentenaries or any other anniversary event is very important that one includes both before and after in the design. So for that reason, to answer the question, Ross, is the design would involve an indigenous motif as well as a military and perhaps convict motif as well, the three, that would symbolise that union 200 years ago next year.
Interestingly, John, the New Zealand 1940 commemorative half crown has something similar of that of the Maori settlement and the modern city. I think it's of Auckland, is it, or of Wellington?
I'm not sure, I just had to look.
Russell,
1940, yeah. Treaty Point, something like that. It's half crown.
Yes. Historians now very much acknowledge we've been mistaken in talking about, for example, in my own patch, the discovery of the Brisbane River. Our Indigenous forebears very rightly say it was never lost. so we want to get that historically correct.
As the commented when somebody said they discovered Victoria Falls, the local people had a hunch it was there.
Anchor session, as everybody knows, the anchor speakers are always chosen to be very strong, wonderful speakers.
Don't do that.
Kevin likes
wonderful to be here. I was just chatting with Don and Don has been a leader in numismatics in Australia for 67 years.
Wow.
It's the most wonderful,
Very good.
wonderful thing. It's a pleasure this afternoon to introduce my colleague Kevin Duddy. Kevin is president of the Redcliffe Numismatic Society, a colleague also of the Queensland branch of the Australian Numismatic Society. And as we all know, Kevin's a very experienced retired soldier. He served with great distinction both in the counter-terrorist unit and in the parachute regiment of the Airborne Division of the British Army. He served combat service in the Falklands, in Afghanistan, in Kenya, in Bosnia and Northern Ireland. And besides his background in that role, Kevin also is a professional classic car restorer and has a business based near Redcliffe where he lives. Kevin's embarrassed when I say it, but he has 21 classic cars, including 2 Ferraris. So we're in the presence of a real professional in that role as well.
Has a big garage.
But if being a professional soldier and a classic car restorer isn't enough, Kevin's also a professional ballroom dance and other dance teacher as well, and has a major interest as an instructor in dancing, and brings a lot of joy and a lot of satisfaction to a lot of people through that portal. But today we welcome Kevin Duddy very much to tell us about King Arthur, the last king of Wessex.
Too many Arthurs today.
And we're looking forward to that presentation very much indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, how does one compete with that?
It's easy, it's you.
When I was given the notation to do this, I was told 20 to 25 minutes, and I thought, how can one speak for 25 minutes on King Alfred? I can't fit it into 4 hours. But I managed to, and I said to General Pern before, I've worked it out that I can do it in 20 minutes if I speak really quickly. And he said, don't speak quickly, speak precisely. I said, well, that'll stick it out to about 30 minutes. But you do what you're told. So here we go. Hopefully you enjoy this. So this is the story of Alfred the Great, king of the Saxons and the last king, and the last kings of Wessex. Second slide, please. Alfred was born in Wantage in Berkshire in the late 840s. Between 847 and 849, the exact date is unknown. He was the youngest son of Athelwulf, the king of Wessex, from 839 to 858. His mother was Osberth. He was the youngest of 6 children, with 4 brothers and 1 sister. His oldest brother Athelstan died before he could succeed his father as king of Wessex. But each of his 3 brothers, Athelbald, Athelberth and Athelred, succeeded to the throne of Wessex. Interesting little note, Athel means royal, in case anyone was ever wondering. Next slide, please. There is little known about Alfred's early life. Most of what we know is written by a Welsh monk, Asa, who was a learned member of Alfred's court and knew Alfred personally. He wrote a biography of the life of Alfred. We have another source of information in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, written around 880 to 1154, along with Alfred's own considerable volumes of writings. Some of the works were on philosophy and ecclesiastical matters, and some on law and political matters of 9th century England. Alfred became king of the West Saxons on the 23rd of April 871 after the death of his brother Athelred. He then became king of all Saxons in 886 and until his passing in 899. Alfred's name in Old English means counsel or wise. He was a very pious man and believed in all deeds should be in the name of God and the church.
Alfred's wish was to unite the 5 kingdoms under one king of all the land. That brings us to the Great Heathen Army, please. Vikings first raided and plundered the island of Lindisfarne in 793. Then continued to cross the North Sea and raid the English coast until finally the Great Heathen Army, led by 3 sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, Halfdan Ragnarsson, Ivar the Boneless, and Ubba, arrived and conquered East Anglia in 865. They wintered in Tetford, then marched north and conquered York and Northumbria by the end of 866. Their conquest was fast and furious, much like a blitzkrieg. By the end of 870, they had subdued Kent and most of Mercia, and in 871, they turned their attention to the Kingdom of Wessex. After several small battles, a great heathen army met the armies of Wessex, led by King Ethelred and his younger brother Alfred in the Battle of Ashdown on the 8th of January 871. Yes, please, Stephen. Okay. Battle of Ashdown. Can't see it too well on there, but there's Ashdown there. No, that's not. That's Chippenham. There's Ashdown. Ashdown, got it. So this is where they first met the Vikings in battle. The Great Heathen Army was routed and gave flight, with many Viking warriors cut down in the Wessex advance. 3 months later, Ethelred died. Unknown causes, but we believe it's possibly due to conflict, and was succeeded by his younger brother Alfred, who paid a Dane guild to allow him to buy time and prepare for the next Viking incursion. In April 871, reinforcements arrived. Oh, that's all wrong. Reinforcements arrived, called the Great Southern Army, led by Earl Guthrum. They arrived from Scandinavia to join forces with the Great Heathen Army, or armies. In AD 874, the Vikings drove King Burgred of Mercia into exile and finally conquered the Mercian kingdom, putting in place their own puppet king, Coldwulf. Coldwulf II, we know him as, ruled 874 to 880. And I will show you a coin of Coldwulf's, and there's one in the cabinet down there if anyone's interested. This left Wessex to stand alone. The Vikings split their army into 2 bands, one led by Halfdan, which raided north into Scotland, the other led by Earl Guthrum, who campaigned against Wessex. Alfred's reign was continuously challenged by Viking raiders and armies. At the high point of the Viking wars, Wessex was the last kingdom to remain in Saxon control. In January 878, at the Christmas festivities were coming to an end, Guthrum and his army made a surprise attack on Chippenham. I had Chippenham before. Chippenham, here we go. So Chippenham is right here. Okay. So this drove Alfred out of the town and into hiding in the marshes of the Somerset levels. From Chippenham, the Vikings began to take over the rest of the kingdom of Wessex. Following his defeat at Chippenham, Alfred was forced to retreat to the island of Athelney, and the Vikings came close to ruling all of Wessex at this point. This is Athelney here, and this is the Somerset levels, or Somerset marshes as we know them as. So that's where he went into hiding. A story is told of while in exile in the marshes, he was given shelter by a peasant woman who left him in charge of cooking cakes on the fire. He let the cakes burn and was severely scolded by the woman. She obviously didn't know who he was. After a period in exile, about 5 months, Alfred sent messages out to all over Wessex and Mercia, pleading for help from any Saxon who could fight. He then rode to Egbert Stone near Selwood, where he was met by the aldermen of Wessex and others who had raised the Fyrds, which are a type of Anglo-Saxon army made up of free men to defend their shire. This suggests that even in a defeated state, Alfred had the ability to organise his forces and command loyalty. That was his main goal, was loyalty from his people. Alfred understood the importance of a coming battle and knew he had the goad for Vikings into combat involving all the Viking armies in Wessex. He sent out a series of taunts designed to get the Vikings to assemble at one point for a final battle. The ensuing Battle of Edgington. There we go. This is our Battle of Edgington right here. So he just had to bring his troops through Egbert Stone and into Edgington. Or Eddington, depending on how you want to say it. The ensuing Battle of Eddington on the 6th to the 8th of May 878 was a decisive victory where Alfred's army followed the Danes back to their stronghold in Chippenham and starved them into submission. This culminated in the signing of the Treaty of Wedmore. There's no document survives. However, several accounts exist. One referenced in Ass's biography of Alfred states that Guthrum, along with 30 of his earls, submitted to be baptised and withdrew the remnants of the great heathen army from the lands of Wessex. The treaty passes the city of London to Alfred, which, although not the primary city at the time, it housed several important mints and government buildings. This was to signal the end of Viking incursions into Wessex and the turning point in the affluence of Wessex. Alfred now started to extract a tax from the Danes to stay out of their territory. The tables had now turned. We note especially that up to 880, the debasement of the coins to allow the silver to stretch further for the payment of soldiers. However, after 880, the silver content of Alfred's coins was to be considered the highest of any monarch in Britain. Around 892 to 893, two large Viking armies and 330 longships crossed from Europe to Britain. Alfred took a position where he could observe both forces. One of the armies broke out and struck northwards. They were overtaken by Alfred's eldest son, Edward the Elder, and defeated in the Battle of Farnham in Surrey, and then again in Beyondfleet. So we don't have Surrey up there, but it would have been somewhere around here, and then back down into Beyondfleet here. So that's where those two battles would have taken place. The lack of food and resources caused the Danes to retreat into Essex, around here. Around 897, the Danes realised they were outmanoeuvred, causing some to move north to Northumbria and some back to the continent. This signalled the end of a Viking intrusion into Saxon-held land, and by 927, the end of Viking rule, as Aethelstan, the grandson of Alfred, became king of all England. So he was our first king, or their first king. Alfred is only the second king in English history to be given the epithet the Great. The other is Canute the Great. He was reputed to be a learned, merciful man of a gracious, level-headed nature. He proposed that education be conducted in English instead of Latin. He also reformed the legal system, military structure, and increased his people's standard of living. His military reform was known as the Burgle Hadaj. A detailed account is to be found in manuscripts held in the British Museum in London. In short, this was a series of 33 burhs, later known today as boroughs, spaced about 20 miles apart. The system allows for the feeding of a certain number of soldiers per town or burh, which could mean that Viking raids could be dealt with decisively within a 24-hour period. A total of around 27,000 troops could be called on, making this by far the largest army in Britain. Alfred is credited as forming the Royal Navy around 897. Right or wrong, he did design his own longships, which were twice as long as previous ships with 60 or more oars, higher sides, and swifter and steadier than any previous ships. Although accounts of Saxon ships going to battle 20 years previous, Alfred's design and structure of a navy is considered by many scholars to be the beginning of the Royal Navy as we know it today. It is worth reading the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle at this point, as it explains quite clearly the events that led to the construction of King Alfred's navy. I've attached an extract at the end of this discussion, so those who have the papers, the last page is the extract from the Saxon Chronicles. It's been translated into English, but it's written in the style of Old English, so it can be a little bit interesting to read, but you'll be fine. Alfred issued a law at which a copy exists from the late 880s, where his innovative approach to law still exists today. One of his items was that of oaths and loyalty to the king, punishable by death, known today as treason. It is also worth noting that a warrior, Saxon-born, raised by Danes, and spoken about at great length in Saxon chronicles and in Alfred's own writings, was the leader of Alfred's armies and responsible for his victories, yet unnamed in all scripts. Now, for those of you who have seen the series The Last Kingdom, you'll know of who I'm talking about, but of course we don't know who this gentleman, this warrior was, because he's unnamed. So he could have been Uhtred, he could have been anybody. Alfred died on the 26th of October, 899. He suffered from an illness that at the time unknown is believed by modern doctors to be Crohn's disease. Did I say that right? Crohn's disease. He was buried in the Old Minster at Westminster. He was then moved to Hyde Abbey, which was demolished during Henry VIII's time. The whereabouts of Alfred's body is currently unknown today. Alfred had 5 to 6 children. We don't know exactly whether it was 5 or 6, but we believe it was one of those two. To his wife Elswith, who was the daughter of a Mercian nobleman. Her mother was Mercian royal family. The eldest child, Athelflaed, also known as the Lady of Mercians, married a Mercian lord, Ethelred. On the death of her husband, 911, Athelflaed ruled Mercia on her own until her death in 918. She aided her younger brother Edward, the elder, to continue her father's wishes to unite England under one king. Edward the Elder was the oldest son of King Alfred. During his rule, the Danes continued to harass the kingdoms of Mercia and Wessex, until after a raid into Mercia, they were met by a combined Mercian and Wessex army and soundly defeated at the Battle of Tettenhall on the 5th of August 910. Unfortunately, Tettenhall's not up there. I should have marked it. Okay. Tettenhall. The Danes did not venture south of the River Humber again. With the help of his sister Athelflaed, Edward continued to push north into Northumbria. Edward died in 924 before he had the chance to unite all the Saxon kingdoms under one king. Athelstan, sorry, could you just another one, Steve? Right. Before I go to the next piece, I had these two sitting in the cabinet ready to bring with me, and I forgot to bring them. This is a Saxon Christian cross. We believe somewhere around 850 to 900. It's about 7 centimetres high by 5 centimetres wide, and we believe it to be a monk's cross. The other piece is a Viking arrowhead. It was found metal detecting in Reading, possibly the Battle of Reading around 871. It's definitely of Scandinavian origin, so we know it to be Viking arrowhead. I think it's a good argument for the Battle of Reading, seeing as it was found there. Athelstan was King Edward the Elder's, the son of King Edward the Elder and his first wife, Egwin. He was king of the Anglo-Saxons from 924 to 927 and king of all England from 927 onwards, until his death in 939. However, it was not until the Great Battle of Brunanburh in 937 that Athelstan became recognised throughout the island of Britain as the king of the English. Athelstan's succession was not without issues from his younger half-brother Edward, but Edward died 16 days after their father Edward, which opened the way for Athelstan to be crowned king of the Saxons. He finally conquered the kingdom of Northumbria in 927, making him king of all England. I've said that. Athelstan's reign is an interesting one, certainly a story for another time. Can you click on it again? Right, I've got a few pieces up here. Athelwulf was Alfred's father. There's one of those in the cabinet there. Alfred the Great Londonia coin. Now what I've done is I've also brought a Viking imitation of Alfred Londonia from a little bit later, 898 to 915, probably 10 to 15, 20 years maybe after the Alfred's coin. But you will see the quality of the Viking imitation is certainly not there compared to Alfred's coinage. But both of those are in the cabinet if someone wants to take a look. Next one please, Stephen. The top one is an Alfred the Great Gloucester, and the next one down is Alfred Exeter coin. Next one please, Stephen. Now we have a couple of Guthrum types, the first two. If I remember right, there's 4 or 5 Guthrums that I brought with me so you can see what they look like. They're Alfred the Great, but they're called the Guthrum type coin. Some have 4 bunches of letters and others only have 3. So there's 2 types of those. If you remember, I mentioned the puppet king put in place in Mercia by the Vikings, Coldwulf II. Well, there we have Coldwulf's coin. And next please, Stephen. Edward the Elder. Now I brought 3 of those with me. That's the floral type, which is Western Mints by Hermood. Athelstan, diademid bust. Unfortunately it's got a little nick out of it, but those who collect these types of coins realise that you take what you can get. Edmund, the grandson of Alfred. Now I've written a paper on this particular one. This one, the money is Arnulf. But a very interesting piece about this, we've got on the obverse Edmund, Rex, but the R is reversed. And it's the only one known at this stage with a reversed R. Next one please, Stephen. Now I mentioned about the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles talking about Alfred forming the Royal Navy. In the back of your sheet is this particular copy, so I'm not going to read it out. But anyone who's interested in the period, it is well worth a read. And that is all I have. Has anyone got any questions? I guess not.
That's wonderful. Have you walked in these places yourself?
Oh, a good few of them.
Yes.
A good few of
It
them.
must be a special feeling to stand in the place where these battles happened. And,
It is. It is. Tracing some of the Viking battles and, of course, the Civil War, Stephen's time, no offence, Stephen, and Charles I. Very interesting going to the battle sites.
now you showed a coin from Exeter. Did Alfred's rule extend that far west into what today is Devon?
It did indeed. Alfred's rule pretty much controlled everything bar Northumbria. He didn't venture over the River Humber, but when he died, his son, Edward the Elder, did. And he continued through Northumbria, but he didn't quite finish taking Northumbria before he died. And that's when Athelstan came in and finished the job 3 years later, in 927. Alfred had a considerable run of the land. Can we go back maybe 4, 5? Go back 5.
To the map.
Oh, there we go. Lovely. Okay. We pretty much see up through here was all of Wessex, and then he started to take over this area here, but he never completed his target before he died. So the Danes still held most of Northumbria at this point.
With the Vikings that were in Ireland as well, did they ever come across
Yes,
them
they did. They did indeed. King Olaf from Dublin brought an army across. That was the Battle of Brunanburg, in fact, in 937. Brunanburg's not in there, it's a bit further north. But the Last Kingdom describes it as a battle of 7 armies. Almost true, but certainly the battle of 4 armies. So you had 2 armies from Scotland, another army from north of Northumbria, and you had Olaf from Dublin. So you had those 4 armies up against Athelstan. There were other times when they did come over, but that's the main one.
Could I ask a question?
Just, were you wanting to continue that? We'll go to Bernie first, I think.
Yeah. You go, Bernie.
Yeah, could I have a look at the slide that shows the Viking imitation of the...
Certainly. There we go. That's Alfred's Londonia, and that's the Viking Londonia. If you want to see them, Bernie, they're in the cabinet there, so you can have a good look at them with the glass.
I thought it'd be so much easier to see there, that's all.
Probably not.
They didn't do a bad job, did they? It's different, but it's...
Didn't do too bad, but you get down here, and the O is a little bit off centre.
And the portrait's all wrong, yeah.
The portrait's a bit wrong. Not a bad crack at it, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Kevin, with the era time known as the Dane Law,
Yes.
was that when they were in control and people had to pay them
Yes,
a toll?
indeed. Especially Mercia, Kent, East Anglia. But they based themselves mainly in Northumbria, except of course for Guthrum's army, that was the southern army. But everybody paid them a Dane guild. Dead right. And that only changed when Alfred finally defeated them in Edgington, and then he could then demand a Dane guild back off them. And that changed the tide of the war. And that then would have told Alfred, right, keep pushing. Now, rather than go too much over Northumbria, he went straight up through Mercia and took all Mercia back. So, and Athelflaed, his eldest daughter, was the Lady of Mercia, so he needed to protect her, which is what he did. And he drove the Danes out of Mercia.
I think that's become a metaphor, hasn't it, Dane Guild, that if you try to buy somebody off, they simply increase the price, don't they? And that's the reason I think that, at least formally, our country or the British Commonwealth won't pay ransoms, will they? They say because of the lesson of Dane Guild, they simply
it doubles and it doubles and it doubles.
Yes.
Sorry, John.
Apparently, very recently, a hoard of coins was found showing both Alfred and Culfred II.
Yep.
And some people think this may cause a reassessment of Culfred. He may, in fact, at one stage of his life, have been an ally of Alfred, although the Chronicle describes him as a foolish king's thane.
Because none of us were alive at the time, it's hard to say for sure. However, there's a book down there that states the Norwegian and Danish influence on England, Scotland and Ireland. That book is written from a Viking point of view. Most of the books we know, like the Saxon Chronicles, are written from a British point of view, or English. That book's written from Danish. So it's been translated into English, which is a good thing, because it's hard to read in Danish for those who don't have the language. And it gives you, obviously, a different account. But when you take the two books, well, not only those two books, but also any of the scripts available from Asa and from Alfred's own writings, and you put them together, you can pretty much draw a pattern and come up with your own conclusions, whether right or wrong, they're yours. But I wouldn't have believed that Coldwolf would have been allied to Alfred.
No, it's disputed, as I suggest.
Yeah. Yes.
Some of the Alfred types of coins are called the Guthrum type. And
Yes.
Guthrum was the enemy. How come they were called that type?
He was, up until 880. After 880, he was not.
It's because they
He'd been converted to Christianity. And of course, Alfred, being the pious man that he was, and also the fact that Alfred was very, very strong on loyalty. So we can assume that Alfred didn't say, right, you're a Christian now, son, so I won't need to see you again, and go off in another direction. I can guarantee that Alfred would have been in touch with what was happening in Guthrum's territory north of Watling Street. It has been said, and the reason why Alfred was so successful at defeating armies that were better organised, stronger, and more of them than what he had, is because he had intelligence, is what we call it today. He had monks all over England and Scotland, and on a daily basis they were writing information down on what was happening in their borough or their town or city. That information would then get sent down to Alfred. Now, it could take months to get there, but it got there. By looking at all the information that was sent to him from all over the country, he could then make notes on where the Vikings were, where they were moving to, what their strengths were, and he could put together an army so that he could defeat them at a place of his choosing, not theirs. Many battles that Alfred fought, he was there, ready for the battle before the Vikings got there, and the Vikings didn't even know he was going. They had no clue. They had maybe left Northumbria, decided they're going to go down and they're going to attack Winchester, for example, or Reading, and on the way down, suddenly the road's blocked. Hello, there's a bloody army in front of me. They were taken by surprise nearly every single battle because he had intelligence, which leads us to believe that Alfred was a very smart man. And he also had a general controlling his army, leading his army and training his army in the Viking ways. Saxons had no idea of a shield wall until this particular soldier taught them how to build a shield wall, which was what the Vikings used to use. You couldn't penetrate it. It was amazing. So he taught the Saxons how to do it, and the first time that the Vikings took on Alfred's army in a major battle, as they went up, they built a shield wall, and they thought, well, this will be interesting, and move, move, move. And all of a sudden the Saxons did it back to them. And they didn't know where this knowledge had come from.
Didn't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, they had no clue.
Kevin, we're in the hands of a professional soldier, we can see that. And it's so wonderful to hear you talking about the importance of intelligence from your own very proud service as a counter-terrorist soldier. And you're proudly today, I see, wearing the parachute regiment tie, of course, and the motto of the Royal Parachute School, I know, is knowledge dispels fear.
Utri Paratus.
And you've given us a lot of knowledge today. Thank you so much. Our President Bernie has personally signed your speaker's certificate today.
Thank you so much.
And so, Steve, it has been a great thrill to hear that account. We've learned so much in the last half hour.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you,
colleagues,
Kevin.
it's a pleasure now to reintroduce somebody well known to us all, to Ross Prattley. Everybody knows Ross, of course, as a retired banker, as a professional numismatist in his own right for Coin Corner. We all remember him from our last meeting here as the wonderful giver, as a horticulturalist of oranges that many of us took home from his own orchard. And we know him also, of course, as an aviculturist, a specialist in parrot breeding and so on, particularly eclectus parrots. And I know that Ross will tell us in 1 second about the eclectus parrot before he starts on this enigmatic talk, which has a secret message to it, just 20 years. Ross Prattley.
Thank you. The eclectus parrots, well, they're my mates, so I've still got them with me, but much to Carol and I'd have a better life together if I didn't have them. So we'll move them on. Now look, just a couple of quick ideas. It's disappointing to me, having with great help from Colin Thomas, forming this biennial conferences last century, and we've had some fabulous speakers this weekend, and it's thanks to the committees that have gone on and arranged it. But of course, Rod Sell mentioned to me initially that it was a bit iffy whether we were going to get the numbers this time. You know, we needed, I think we were going for at least 20, but it's come about again. So my challenge to everybody is to make sure you try and talk somebody else into coming in 2 years' time. The other thing I'd like to do, I've got it's probably completely illegal, but you know, who's worried about that? You know, you'd love an item like this, wouldn't you? Hey? I'd like Rod Sell just to come out for a second.
Good luck.
I don't need a haircut, thank you.
I want to announce that and give him the Order of the Orange, because I'll tell you, there you are, sir. And there's your orange, and there's bags for everybody else over there. Without the likes of Rod Sell, the Sydney Society, I think, it'd disappear. And that's another reason why committee members should be trying to plan to have other people in view to take over from their duties that they seem to be just destined to keep on and on and on, you know. But of course, in recent times, unfortunately, we've lost a few of our great members, and no doubt that'll go on, but we'd like to keep it all together. Now, just 20 years, well, let's get into this one. You'll have to bear with me. I was hoping to print this out, but Stephen came to my rescue, as usual. Where are we? I've got a few things to read out. Where are we? Yeah, I sent the name in as just 20 years, because it just happened to come to me at the time. These computers, I'll tell you, we're ruled by them. And this one's going to just give me a couple of seconds. But you can go to the next slide. Really, what I on about was lest we forget. And why this particular soldier? Well, Henry had a loving mum and dad and a younger brother, Albert, working the family dairy in Eltham, New Zealand. World War I had begun on the other side of the world, but as did many thousands of young men in New Zealand, the brothers answered the call. Next slide. This was the census and the initial call-up for every male 17 to 60 years of age. The brothers were just 31 and 19 years of age at that stage. 1916, Henry enlisted and Alfred too, some months later. Following basic training, Henry was farewelled. Next. This is his younger brother who joined up also. Now, it took about 8 weeks travelling to Egypt in a convoy. Mum, Miriam Ann Hodgson, and Dad, William, moved to Wellington, New Zealand. Mum was still a postal clerk in Wellington Post Office. So what's this all about? Next slide. Okay. A pretty tatty unslabbed. Of course, does anybody get their gear slabbed?
No.
Oh, hooray. Hooray. We've got them so convinced in the IBNS they've got to get this paper slabbed. I've been looking at gear that's sort of 50 years old and it's still okay. And nobody will convince me that people have handled them, so they've got some sort of acid on them, and then these guys are sealing them up completely. And it's taking now, it's so popular, it's taking now 6 to 8 months to get your item back. And apparently at an American Numismatic shows, all you hear all day is click, 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 and they're breaking the coins open because they're sure if they send them back in again, they'll put them up MS64, maybe get to MS65, thousands more dollars. It's an Americanism we don't want to know about. Okay. Pretty tatty, unslabbed, 2 and 6 penny overprint over the halfpenny. These overprints of British postal orders were introduced in about 1907, and they went throughout the Commonwealth, but Australia said thumbs down to them. Now, this one, you might know it was ex-my mate Mark Freehill. Hadn't ever shown it to me. Now, rather ordinary condition, nevertheless an extremely rare New Zealand overprinted BPR. In Dr. John Gledhill's 2-volume book titled Overprinted British Postal Orders, which our Postal Order Society, about 600 pages in the 2 volumes, gave free to members in 2020. And it was also the IBNS, judged the IBNS Book of the Year. Probably 100 copies all up, a fabulous item. He's working on a supplement at the moment, but because always when you release books, there's always people eager then, instead of contributing them initially, they say, oh look, I've got one that's not in the book, you know, here we go. And so he's putting together all these ones that are coming forth now. To date, John has only recorded the following Downy head overprints, right? This is classed as the Downy head design. The recorded to date was 1 Solomon Islands, 6 India, 2 New Zealand, 1 St Lucia, 1 South Africa, and 3 southern Nigeria. So the two New Zealand ones I've managed to hive away myself. The effigy of King George V, named Downy Head, was introduced upon His Majesty's succession to the throne following his father, King Edward VII's sudden death. George V certainly was thrust onto the throne. He was completing naval duties, at which he actually enjoyed. So he was raced on back to England to be pronounced King George V. However, King George V, a profound philatelist, disliked the effigy and immediately ordered it to be removed and replaced by a profile image. William Downey, who had provided this, well, he was Queen Victoria's photographer, and she was so suitably impressed it led to a long association with the royal family, hence him coming and taking a photograph of George V, which became the Downey head for a short period. Did you know King George V was one of the notable philatelists of his day? In 1893, as Duke of York, he was elected honorary vice president of what became the Royal Philatelic Society of London. On his marriage that year, fellow members of the society gave him an album of nearly 1,500 postage stamps as a wedding present. He expanded the collection with a number of high-priced purchases of rare stamps and covers. His 1904 purchase of the Mauritius Twopenny Blue for £1,450 set a new record for a single stamp. A courtier asked the prince if he had seen that some damn fool had paid as much as £1,400 for one stamp. Yes, George replied, I was that damn fool. So, moving along, this is the other one, and when I sent it to John, I should have advised him. It's actually in the book, but he thought I'd either miscropped it or whatever. But I've advised him that it's actually an error on the front by being an example of a registration shift, and that occurs in a lot of printing in banknotes. It's relatively common. It does detract from it, but it's still another exceedingly rare item. Next, please. Okay, all aboard the Wallachra. All aboard, over 2,200 New Zealand troops were transported in a convoy which from Wellington to Egypt took 8 weeks. So you get the gist of what, going back to that first Tatty one, what had actually happened was Henry had boarded the Wallachra and headed for Egypt, and then quickly to the Western Front in France. Mum had issued the postal order. Can we whiz back to that Tatty one, please?
Back or forward?
Back. Yeah, that one, right. So he's actually signed for receiving it. Mum actually issued it and sent it over to him. It's extreme. It's in so poor condition that I can just imagine him having it stuffed in his pocket. Didn't have time to cash it in, or had it in his kit bag, and he met his demise on the Western Front. Bang, gone. And likewise, and for the news then to travel back to Mum and Dad, equally took sort of 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, let's keep going, please. Oh, yeah, geez, that was quick, wasn't it? That's really quick. Now look, that implement, I thought of another use for it, there it is, but I can pass it around. But it's a World War I bayonet, right? And that fitted on the end of a 303 rifle, and it's a pretty deadly item. They have a groove, a flute either side. The idea was it was in, up, on guard sort of thing. By having the flute in there, that let air into the wound and did some enormous damage. But can you get the feeling of a guy that actually did that? Pushed it into somebody's body or whatever. He might have even, like you see the rugby league matches where they give them a stiff arm and they've ducked slightly, might have put it through his head. You know, it's just horrible, totally horrible. And but that's what we live with. And as I say, the memories then coming back, losing the first son, then a year later losing the second son, you can imagine what it does to the mum and dad who's still alive and family and friends. So war's bad news. You'd agree, sure.
Unfortunately, you've got to have them.
Well, possibly we do when you look at what this rat Putin's done, and you know, he probably nothing will happen to him, and yet they're crucifying Ben Robert Smith. Anyway, I'll leave it on the table. I don't think I should pass it round, but you're more than welcome to handle it, but you don't destroy anybody. Okay, well that's the end. Any questions?
Is it gilded?
Beg your pardon?
Is it gilded or is it just nice?
No. When I used to get at Amors, I'd take the pennies in and get them all 24 karat gold plated. My uncle bought that at an auction. The uncle that had the property where I was sitting in the potty, and he loved buying things at auctions. And he bought the bayonet at auction and ended up using it to open paint cans with. But Rossi ended up deering it and gave it a better end. So I sent it into Amors and they had a 24 karat gold plating.
So it's gilded, yeah. Do you have a scabbard for it?
No. Have you got one?
Yeah, unfortunately it's got one of those in it. I've got two, but they both got those in them. Sorry.
In the Second World War, the soldiers didn't like the long bayonet, and a lot of them cut them down to make small, as you know, so there's a lot of surviving.
What a can opener for the bully beef.
Easy to manoeuvre a small one.
I was just going to ask, was it common for conscription to extend to the age of 60? Would they send a guy of 57 off to war?
Well, they'd probably go into administration. You know, I know my dad was
put the older folks into the position where the younger folks were being sucked out of.
My dad was 45 when he went off to the Second World War.
I mean, it's New Zealand conscription, and everybody had to register. That was the law, and I've got the full registration, but you know, my grandfather, he had 6 kids, so they started all in priority, singles, you know, married, age, and so I don't think we got much over 40. They had conscription for the whole war.
Ross, the postal orders were never cashed, where they were found.
These ones, no.
Yes, they were sent back to his parents after his death. Is that right?
Well, that first one, yes. It would have come back with other
his effects,
personal effects. Yeah. And the crazy thing is, I go back through my postal order newses of 2 years ago, and I've got virtually an identical story, where it was 2 brothers and there was 5 other siblings, and the same happened to them. You got a tear in your eye, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely.
David, I've been following the Ukraine war fairly closely. It's fairly affected a lot of us, I think. Why should we have such a war in this time of peace and prosperity for everybody? But I've never seen any pictures of Ukraine soldiers with bayonets. Has the sort of drone system sort of made things like bayonets up close and terribly personal, no longer required?
Most of the modern soldiers don't actually fix bayonets anymore, but they are issued with them and they're just used as a general knife.
Okay.
Rather than, because the minute you fix a bayonet to a rifle, it loses its accuracy.
The historians have demonstrated that in the last 1,000 years, in all of Europe, there have only been 3 periods of 25 years continuously when there hasn't been war in Europe. So it's a terrible statistic that war is the norm and peace is the exception. And we're seeing that tragically, as David has pointed out, with the terrible thing that's happened in Ukraine. Will you tell us a little bit in a moment about the Eclectus parrot?
Oh, goodness. Look,
Pretty cocky.
yeah, they're about glass size. They're hell of a good talkers, second to the African greys. 28 days they hatch. Ma at the moment would have hatched out one there, and that's number 95 and 96 that she's hatched out from. And she was in such good condition, I was going to put her in the Royal Easter Show this year earlier. I got her out, put her in the cage, and it would have been the first time she'd been in a cage. Because she's just basically a machine. But she just looked so good the way we've kept her. If I put water on her, she's bald all the way down the curl. But as soon as she dries out, magic. Fabulous bird. Fabulous mum. Oh, here we go. Who's brought these in?
Wikipedia.
Cheeky buggers. Yeah. Boy on the right, girl on the left.
Are you the only serious breeder in the
No, no.
Many breeders?
No, there are a number, but I'm concentrating on a subspecies, a couple of different subspecies that are exceedingly hard, because one, they're smuggled in from islands off Indonesia many years ago, and only in small numbers, and the silly thing is they've interbred them, or breeding mothers to sons and brothers to sisters, and they've lost their size. There's an Australian one that's up in Cape York, and he's the supremo. He's more. Mine goes sort of 350 grams to 500 grams. These ones are sort of 550 to 650. And to give you an idea, weight-wise, because obviously if you've got a good healthy bird, 550 to 650 grams compares with the black cockatoos that you see flying over, which are only about 750 grams, even though they're so much bigger. They hatch out, they're half the size of my thumb, they're amazing. As I say, they hatch out after 28 days, and Mars 95 and 96 was due to be yesterday on the 10th. And like clockwork, it'll be there, and I always reward her with dandelion. She just absolutely loves dandelion. And that's how I can get to have a look at them. The young, otherwise she protects them and guards them madly. Give her a dose of dandelion and she comes out of the nest box. Spends her life in the nest box. What else do mothers do?
You can sell as many as you breed, I guess.
Well, in 2014 I bred over 80 of them, and sold them easily, and thought, I've got 3 sons, none of them got houses. How about coming in with me and I'll get your house within a couple of years, a deposit anyway. Oh no, I don't like birds. No.
Really?
Banknotes and coins, make sure you get rid of that rubbish, Dad, Anyway, we've had one son come back to us recently, and that's an interesting thing too.
Well, Ross, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Our final presentation of the day is Bernie's kindly going to read one of the papers from Phil Benjamin. As we all know, Phil is the treasurer of the Queensland branch of the Australian Numismatic Society. Phil Benjamin is a retired surgeon, from Kingaroy for many decades, but in his retired life has discovered numismatics and has become a great enthusiast. And he's one of the now, perhaps, I don't know, the acknowledged expert on Cook numismatica in Australia. He has an incredible collection of Cook numismatics. But Bernie, as we all know, Phil, the day before on Thursday, rang Bernie and Jerry and Rod as our conveners to say that he had COVID. But kindly, Bernie's going to read one of Phil's
papers?
I've actually got 3 short papers here, and sort of half an hour allocated, so why don't we have a go at having them all? I haven't seen any of the pictures, I don't know anything about it, but I'll do my best to read it. So I'll start off with the Cremorne Gardens, George Coppin. So I think slide 2 please. Here we are. The gardens were established by James Ellis on the bank of the River Murray. Sorry, Yarra River. I'm looking off to a good start here. He had earlier managed and leased similar gardens of the same name on the banks of the River Thames at Chelsea in London. He had been declared bankrupt and emigrated to Australia. I think that's a familiar tale. To take advantage of the business opportunities made possible by the Victorian gold rush and its accompanying population explosion. He created a venue with viable entertainments to divert the population of the rapidly expanding capital of the new Australian colony, where entertainment was demanded by a predominantly male society. The wowser element in Melbourne did not approve of the pleasure gardens. Ellis had invested much money in them and they were very popular. The criticism of the availability of liquor and the use of the venue by prostitutes, interesting, went against him. He was forced to sell and the gardens were taken over by George Coppin, a man with a theatrical background. Cremorne was Coppin's indulgence and hobby, and he poured money into them without applying business acumen. The gardens were notable as being the location of the first balloon flight in Australia, when in 1858 Englishman William Dean floated 7 miles, or 11 kilometres, north to Brunswick. This same year, Coppin entered politics on and off 1958 to 1988. Unfortunately, Phil has this in a rather epigrammatic style at times and I can only read what's here. In 1959, Coppin imported 6 camels from Aden as exhibits for the Cremorne Gardens menagerie, and in 1860 sold them to the Exploration Committee of the Royal Society of Victoria, who used them on the Burke and Wills expedition. With the rise of Puritanism in the 1860s, the gardens became hugely unprofitable and could no longer be maintained. Coppin closed the doors in February 1863, the land was sold and became a private lunatic asylum, which itself closed in the 1880s. The land was then subdivided for housing by Thomas Bent. With the turn of the century, much of the housing gave way to small to large industrial establishments, but much of the small working class housing remains today and has been progressively gentrified. Coppin became insolvent at least twice, but recovered and repaid his debtors in full both times. As an example of his entrepreneurship, he left for the goldfields himself in 1851, but lasted 2 days on the diggings before gauging a means of certain fortune in entertaining the miners on the spree in Geelong. He was at his best as a comedian and businessman. George Coppin's life is too complicated to deal with here, but he is best understood by 2 quotes from the Dictionary of Australian Biography. And they are: in 1864, Charles Keane, an English actor-manager, best known for his revivals of Shakespearean plays and closely involved with Coppin, wrote to his daughter in 1864. This is the first one. Mr. Coppin is a good businessman and I believe is a truly upright and honest man. But he is a common man and possesses a rudeness of manner which is very unpleasant when things do not run smoothly. A well-bred man of the world has the art to hide such feelings. And the second quote is: Coppin has been credited with both fathering the Australian theatre and inaugurating its second phase of development by introducing the pernicious in inverted commas, starring tours of visiting celebrities. The first claim can well be disputed. Undoubtedly his enterprise was irrepressible, the business of entertainment suited his talents, but more important, he had an ingrained love of the theatre. He acted to make money, but he found a stage in many other spheres. His progressive approach to the theatre was evidenced by his methods of advertising, his insistence on correct costuming, and his recognition in 1971 of the need for a school of acting to develop Australian talent. But he was not always scrupulous in his dealings with his rivals. That is the quote. A plaque in his honour has been placed in the Comedy Theatre, which now occupies the site of the old prefabricated Olympic Theatre, an iron pot in inverted commas, which Coppin brought with him from England in sections and built in 1855. Here endeth that lesson. So have a look at that. Comedic figure in milky white, 1866.
That's a beautiful token, isn't it? Could we just go back to that? Does anybody else have this token?
I don't, but I've seen them, or seen one or two for sale in Nobles catalogues, but I'm looking at that, it's very impressive.
To me, this shows the value of numismatics, and Benjamin's obviously obtained this token and developed this wonderful presentation and the story about it from this, as we hear so often from presentations as well. Bernie, it's interesting that Phil's told us about the fact that he had to close the gardens, the Cremorne Gardens, because of conservatism. Phil has used the word wowserism, and that happens, of course. New South Wales here introduced a public lottery, I think in the first decade of the 20th century, and this was copied in Queensland. Those Queenslanders will know there was something called the Golden Casket, but there was enormous resistance to it from the established churches, and the Premier of Queensland made, after the Golden Casket had funded, for example, the whole Faculty of Medicine, the new medical school in Queensland, and the great Edith Cavell Memorial Building in Brisbane, the Premier was forced to say, the Golden Casket is not a gamble, it is simply a small investment. Will bring much good to the state.
The oldest philosophical argument is that the end justifies the means.
But I know
I've got two more to read, John.
Yes, I know, but they're quite different themes, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. So is any points to Bernie on Phil's paper on the Coppin Gardens?
It's a sequel to this.
Sorry, Cremorne.
Because that was last time we were here, we had the play act. That's where the mint master was condemned. He was sent to Cremorne Gardens.
Ah,
Right.
as an
How
inmate.
interesting. When it was the psychiatric institution. How interesting. Mercifully now, I grew up and played the organ in the Presbyterian Church for 12 years as a youth, and gambling was looked upon with great odium on at that time, but now we hear nothing really against, do we? Gambling from the...
There's a bit of a backlash now
Is there?
against sports betting, yeah.
I think extreme sports betting, isn't it? And the problem of poker machines and people becoming but it's not the gambling itself, it's the extreme form now, which is the problem.
The addictive nature of gambling.
Poker machines weren't in Queensland, were they?
Oh, very much so.
They are now. They weren't.
Yes, they came late.
Eh?
They did come late.
Yeah,
But-
right, because a great collector, this Bill Johnson who lived in Queensland, I remember him coming down to our place, and we had a poker machine, so he set his wife up using the poker machine while I was selling him banknotes.
Perhaps I could ask Stephen, do we see still conservatism of gambling now in the churches?
Yes, there are some fundamentalist Protestant churches who refuse to take money from the lottery fund, even though they've got worthy charities that they're running. That they refuse to touch gambling money and say, we don't want that, we'll take money from somewhere else.
Bernie, back to you.
Well, this is the second paper from Phil. The paper I've got here says Richard William Pearce, P-E-A-R-S-E. The dates given on this paper are 1877 to 1953.
I think your spelling is right and that title screen is wrong, because the medal spells it your way.
Not my way, Phil's way. And as a surgeon, there's only the surgeon's way. Okay, so we'll hear about Richard William Pearce. Was a New Zealand farmer and inventor who performed pioneering aviation experiments. Witnesses interviewed many years afterwards claimed that Pearce flew and landed a powered, heavier-than-air machine on the 31st of March 1903, 9 months before the Wright brothers flew.
Wow.
Documentary evidence for these claims remains open to interpretation and dispute, and Pearce himself never made such claims. I'll just mention that there's another spelling of Pearce here, in addition to the one I've got here and there. P-E-A-R-C-E. Anyway, so Pearce himself never made such claims. In a newspaper interview in 1909, he said he did not, and in brackets, inverted commas, attempt anything practical until 1904. Close quotes. So slide 2, please.
Hang on, just fixing a typo.
Ever helpful.
Date, Steve.
Date.
Don't worry about that. Let's have a look at slide 2. So here we are. The biographer Gordon Ogilvie credits Pearce with several far-sighted concepts: a monoplane configuration, wing flaps and rear elevator, tricycle undercarriage with steerable nose wheel, and a propeller with variable pitch blades.
Wonderful.
Pearce ended his flying experiments about 1911, but continued aviation work, attempting to develop a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft and rotor craft. Don't ask me what a rotor craft is.
Helicopter.
Late in life, he became bitter and paranoid and was admitted to a mental hospital in 1951, where he remained until his death. Now, I've seen these medals before. Are you familiar with them, Jerry?
No.
No. I've
I
seen
thought
these.
they made a replica of his plane somewhere.
That could be something to do with this.
What's that? It's in Mozart.
Yeah, I think there was a replica of it. Might have a look.
Museum of Transport and Technology, Richard Pearce.
Yeah, it's Mozart.
Okay. This is a New Zealand produced medal, presumably. Oh yeah, Auckland, New
Auckland.
Zealand. Auckland, New Zealand.
There's a museum up there they've got.
Okay. And it's definitely 1877 to 1953, according to the medal.
You go there, they've got the Avro Lancaster. So they start up every year. It's noisy.
So,
Well, it's a pretty impressive claim if it's pre-Wright brothers, isn't it?
yes, but he didn't make the claim himself.
New Zealand's probably the Australians claimed it.
Is it throughout New Zealand? Does everybody sing the praises of?
Richard Pearce,
Well,
I
no,
think it's pretty
yeah.
well known. Yeah. If you have a look on, you've got time, just have a look on the internet, you find a heap about it.
I had to resist the temptation to offer a paper at this conference on Bernoulli. Does everybody know about Bernoulli's theorem? Apart from Barry? Barry Scott. Bernoulli's theorem explains the flight, why this plane would take off. As you know, Bernoulli's theorem talks about pressures in airflow where there's different velocities. And by the law of conservation of energy, in a faster airflow, there's a less pressure. So if in the front of that wing, if I could draw an airfoil wing in the sky, two molecules in front of there, this molecule has to go further than this one going in a straight line for there to be no vacuum here. And Bernoulli's theorem predicts then faster flow, less pressure, so there's a vector, and that's why planes fly.
Yeah, that's how lift is evolved. And that doesn't show much of a camber, but I presume it would have.
But in terms of Pearce and whether or not he actually flew, it's a bit like Hillary climbing Mount Everest. He probably wasn't the first to actually climb Mount Everest, but he was the first to go up, come back with photos.
And the fact that he did it
And he was a king.
adjacent to the day of the coronation sort of gave it
Yes.
an extra frisson.
Extra fillip.
No further points on.
Well, can I just say, you know, the computer is now connected to the internet, so if you want to have a look a bit more.
On the Lilly's theorem? No, sorry.
No,
We've got the syntax police here already working.
No, we do.
Bernie's got a
Okay, Bernie, third.
I haven't got a third paper, but I'd like to ring Phil's third paper, so make sure it's recorded for posterity. Ooh.
He's
It's
got
not
the
like
shapes.
it's not like that on this screen.
He's got
It's
the
just
shapes.
great.
Okay.
He's getting a bit old.
Looks a bit like
Getting
Lennon
more
from this
impressive.
angle, but maybe I'm just a bit paranoid.
It's like me in the
The
morning.
last paper of the conference is sparkling.
Yes, well, it's we might be on our last legs like that. I don't know. Anyway, the paper's titled Sir Hubert Wilkins, MCN Bar, 1888 to 1958. Hubert Wilkins was a native of Mount Bryan East, South Australia, the last of 13 children in a family of pioneer settlers and sheep farmers. He was born at Mount Bryan East, South Australia. I thought you just said that. He moved to Adelaide and then to Sydney, gaining cinematographic experience. That's a mouthful. I think it means film. In England, he became a pioneer and aerial photographer whilst working for Gaumont Studios. He was a fearless World War photographer in the First Balkan War of 1812-13. Maybe take it on to the next slide and see what that is. Oh, okay. That's not much better.
It's probably the projector, Steve.
Is it right there?
Projector off and on.
No, just check the.
Reboot it.
Okay.
Keep talking.
Okay, I will. I was trying to save you looking at a flickering photo, but it's... So he's in the First Balkan War of 1912-13, covering the war for the Chronicle. His photographic skill earned him a place on various Arctic expeditions, including the controversial 1913 to 1916 Canadian Arctic expedition. In 1917, Wilkins returned to his native Australia, joining the Australian Flying Corps in the rank of second lieutenant. Wilkins later transferred to the general list and in 1918 was appointed as an official war photographer. In June 1918, Wilkins was awarded the Military Cross for his efforts to rescue wounded soldiers during the Third Battle of Ypres. He remains the only Australian official photographer from any war to have received a combat medal. I think he must mean a combat decoration. The following month, Wilkins was promoted to captain and became commanding officer number 3, photographic subsection of the Australian War Records Unit. Wilkins' work frequently led him into the thick of the fighting, and during the Battle of the Hindenburg Line, he assumed command of a group of American soldiers who had lost their officers in an earlier attack, directing them until support arrived. Well, that is a very much improved representation of our friend Sir Hubert. That's great.
I'm a trained scientist. I turned it off and on again.
It's called rebooting, isn't it?
Next time I'm told to do that, I'll do it, following your example. So Wilkins was subsequently awarded a bar to his military cross in the 1919 birthday honours. When Sir John Monash was asked by the visiting American journalist Lowell Thomas, in brackets, who had written with Lawrence in Arabia and made him an international hero, if Australia had a similar hero, Monash spoke of Wilkins. Yes, there was one. He was a highly accomplished and absolutely fearless combat photographer. What happened to him is a story of epic proportions. Wounded many times. He always came through. At times he brought in the wounded, at other times he supplied vital intelligence of enemy activity he observed. At one point he even rallied troops as a combat officer. His record is unique. That was me speaking with the voice of Monash. So slide 2. No one here knows what he spoke like though.
Oh, that's good.
There we are, the Detroit Arctic Expedition. Okay. So in March 1927, Wilkins and pilot Carl Ben Eilerson explored the drift ice north of Alaska, touching down upon it in Eilerson's aeroplane in the first land plane descent onto drift ice. Soundings taken at the landing site indicated a water depth of 16,000 feet.
Oh.
So if something went wrong with the ice, and Wilkins hypothesised from the experience that future Arctic expeditions would take advantage of the wide expanses of open ice to use aircraft in exploration. Wilkins died in Framingham, Massachusetts on 30 November 1958. The US Navy later took his ashes to the North Pole aboard the submarine USS Skate on the 17th of March 1959. No significance in St Patrick's Day there, I presume. This was the man who sold his plane called Detroiter to Charles Kingsford Smith, who after refurbishment renamed it Southern Cross.
Wow.
Slide 3. So there it is, the link to the Southern Cross. After a number of crashes, Wilkins in 1928 wanted to try again, and he saw a new lighter plane, a Lockheed Vega or something. He immediately ordered one. To pay for the Lockheed Vega, he needed to sell something. He removed the large wing from the composite plane and put it back on the 3-engine fuselage and offered it to Kingsford Smith without engines. Kingsford Smith and Charles Young purchased new engines, and that is the plane that became the Southern Cross. It was the original Fokker F Roman numeral 7, which is VII, fuselage, an original 3-engine wing that became the Southern Cross. Kingsford Smith's Southern Cross. So there we are.
So that plane's out at the airport, isn't it?
Yes,
in Brisbane.
In Brisbane.
There's a copy of that plane, and I've been in the cockpit of it, and it's fascinating, just sitting in the seat and imagining the real one. It's very interesting, by the way, that these 3 talks are a sequel to the original talk that you did with Phil Wood Benjamin's lovely collection of pictures of early aeronautical people. So he's obviously done a lot of research and found these as extra little stories, which is quite amazing. I really enjoyed that.
I think Phil's able to suss out a good story when he
Yes.
when he noses around it. He finds that linkage to the odd and curious.
Yeah, it's very good.
Anyway, I can't answer any questions other than what I've got written here. So
Well, the military photographers do a great, incredible job in military campaigns. They, one of the most iconic portrayals of the Second World War, of course, is the picture of the Battle of Buna with the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angel helping the blinded Australian soldier back, which stirred the nation. Really, we've been very...
and of course Frank Hurley was a famous World War One war photographer who'd been down to the and filmed the crushing of the Endurance.
The Last Explorer.
Yes.
The book, it's a really good read. And some of the events that he was involved in is just mind-blowing. He took a submarine under the Arctic ice, a diesel-powered one, and almost killed everybody. His actual name is George Herbert, but he met the king and he refused to use his name. This was George in his meeting. So very humble man. Really good read.
Okay.
Really good read.
Well, thank you. Well, we thank our three speakers for this session very much indeed. Three wonderful sets of papers indeed. That closes the session. Bernie, can I hand back to you now as our president and Queensland and one of our conveners for this conference to close the conference.
I'd like to thank John and earlier today Rod for their careful husbanding of our speakers and making sure that everything ran on time and was just great. And thanks to Stephen for his technical wizardry there, not only with the magic finger, but also his ability to turn the machine on and then turn it off and then on, and to restore it to like new. So that was a marvellous effort. So thanks for that, Stephen, and for all your efforts over the days. I'd also like to thank everyone for coming along to the conference. As was alluded to by Ross, we were concerned that there wasn't going to be enough support for this conference, but it would be such a tragedy if after starting in 1986 we weren't able to keep them going. And although we've got a smaller group, we're not back up to the numbers of 40 that we had years and years ago, but we have got a very enthusiastic, a very highly motivated group we've got here, and seeing wonderful, wonderful material. So even in lesser numbers, I think we've still got many, many diamonds being produced here by the members. So it's still a very worthwhile effort. And thanks to everyone for coming along, particularly to Gary and Janet for coming all that way from Rocky. Amongst all those methods of transportation, I just wonder where the camel came in, or why it wasn't left out, more than a point. But we've all appreciated the effort everyone's done in writing these papers, and now the thing is to polish them up, get them to our editor, so a journal can be produced by the Society, and this can become a lasting memorial to what has been produced, and the talks that we give don't just disappear into the ether, but they're a lasting source of knowledge to future numismatists. So I think everyone, let's give ourselves a clap, and thanks for a great conference. I've mentioned to a couple of people about, now that the conference is over, that the possibility of going to the RSL for those who want to go this evening. There's no bus running. I've spoken to the RSL myself. So if we want to get to the RSL, we can't make a booking at the Brasserie. I think that's the largest eating area there. There's a number of different ones. But if we can get there around that 5:30 time, the lady I spoke to on the phone, she assured me that there'd be no trouble getting tables sufficient for 14 or so people. So it won't be a table of 14, of course, but it'll be something that we can suitably arrange ourselves on. Now, the question arises of transport. Some people have mentioned, like Royleen, Don's daughter, that she'd have 1 or 2 seats in their car. Judith and David have mentioned there could be a couple of seats in your car.
I've got three seats in mine.
3 seats there. How many people, and 2 with Gordon and Carol, and 2 with Barry and John? So it looks as though at least Auntie and I can get a lift.
We'll get there.
So how many people how many would like to go to the thing this evening?
We could drive.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a good number. So, well, what shall we do? Leave here, say around 5:15?
Yeah.
Does everyone know where the club is in central Coffs Harbour?
I'm sure my sat-nav knows.
Even better. Even better.
We went there last year, so most of us remember how to get there.
Yeah.
We went there
I
twice
think I
last
remember
year.
seeing it driving through town on the way to
Yes.
the
I think they call it
CEX.
C.X or something.
Yeah, CX.
CX, is that it?
Coffs ex-servicemen.
Oh, ex-servicemen club, okay. Well, I think at that stage, well, let's make a date for leaving here around 5:15, gathering at the Brasserie at the RSL club around 5:30, and we'll...
So if people didn't want to drive themselves, where will they meet to meet a driver? So So sort of at the reception door, or?
Well, for a start, who needs a lift?
You're right, I'm right.
So I'll go.
Yeah, we'll go together, plus two others.
You'll drive, Barry.
Will you give
Okay.
Kevin and I lift?
Yes, I do.
We'll go with
Well,
Do you want to go with
I'm happy we'll go with Don and Roy Lean.
Yeah.
I've just got the word from the driver in the wings.
Right.
So everyone's right for a lift.
Stephen.
Everyone okay?
Don't forget to take a bag of oranges.
Oh,
Thanks very much.
okay, well done, buddy.
If I had a gavel, I'd use it now.